I'm a convert to the church. I read the Book of Mormon back in 1951 and 2 when I was in the Navy. I spent 26 years flying Navy airplanes. And during Korea, I was privileged to read the Book of Mormon, and I didn't finish Second Nephi before I knew it was true. It was what I'd been looking for years. And the Book of Mormon itself has its own testimony. You read the Book of Mormon with sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ, He will manifest to you that the book is true. And the doctrines in the Book of Mormon are the most glorious doctrines that exist. The testimony of the Book of Mormon is that it is the most correct book on earth. It is a keystone of our religion. The prophet Joseph said this. And that a man would get near to God by abiding with the precepts of the Book of Mormon than any other book. Moroni tells us, if you read the Book of Mormon, real intent, having faith in Christ, then you will know of its truthfulness. The Lord will reveal it to you by the power of the Holy Ghost. And so the location of where it took place is really not vital to the doctrine that it teaches in the Book of Mormon, except that there's been different ideas of where it happened. Some thought it took place down south in Guatemala or Mexico. Others felt that it took place in the United States. And I'm one of those that feels that the promises that are made in the Book of Mormon gives you a good feeling for where it actually took place. It has to be a land of liberty and freedom. It has to be a land where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. It is a place where it's choice above all other lands. And that has to be in the United States because there's nothing like the U.S. of A. any place on earth. It's unique. And then there's never going to be a king reign over this land because Jesus Christ is our king. And He will not allow a king on this land. And so there's so many different aspects of the Book of Mormon's own testimony about itself, where it happened, that it fits the United States better than any place else. Now, what you're going to see here is some DNA testing that has very recently, it was done recently, which tells us that there were the Israeli genes in the United States, and they couldn't find those in Mexico and down south, in South America. And so it makes a good case for the United States. You don't have to believe it. You're at liberty to make your own decision about it. And you will feel good about wherever it was when you understand the doctrines that are taught in the Book of Mormon. And so we don't say exactly where it happened. We don't know exactly where it happened, but we can say this is a good fit in many places in the U.S. of A. where it happened. There are others that think they find the fit down in Central America. I've been there, and there are places down there that I had serious questions about. In the U.S., it all fits together, and it is the most important thing that could happen in the U.S. because we had not only people led here by the hand of the Lord, but they established a government that was based on the doctrine that come from the Lord Jesus Christ Himself. And so this is a land of liberty and freedom, and part of that liberty and freedom means you can believe anything you want to, when you want to. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I think you're going to enjoy what you see here. But it's up to you to make a decision.
I'd like to thank you all very much for coming tonight. I'm very excited about sharing this information that has taken about 2.5 years to put together. I'll tell you a few things. How this all got started really goes back to 2003, the spring conference. And we were there at the conference center, and I was walking up to it, and I noticed there was this huge banner. And it said, DNA proves Book of Mormon false. And I looked at that, and I thought, that is really interesting. Because it seems that every time that anti-Mormons drag out some other evidence that they think refutes the Book of Mormon's veracity, it's just a matter of time before that is addressed and shown to be false, and then they just move on to something else. And so I was fully confident that we were going to find, the LDS scholarly community would find the answers to this DNA question. A quick question, how many of you know about the DNA controversy? A few of you, okay? Actually, several of you. All right, well, that's what we're going to actually be talking about to begin with tonight. And the research that started actually came about because for several years, I've been doing scientific research. For 6 years, I've been doing research for a natural sciences book project. And that helped to, one of the aspects of that project was to learn about and do research on human migration throughout the world. And as a spin-off of that, I started doing more information about DNA, and because of that, and then also over the course of time, I kept looking to find out if we had an answer yet to the DNA question. And I kept looking, and I kept looking, and there were several LDS scholars who were attempting to address the issue, but didn't really have an answer to this. Now, the quick version is that if the Book of Mormon is true, and I believe that it is, so nobody panic, okay? Where did Lehi come from? Where did he leave from?
Jerusalem.
From Jerusalem, that's right. And then came to the Americas someplace, and that would mean that he and his family, his wife and Ishmael and his family, would have come here and then eventually populated. In fact, the Book of Mormon talks about that they covered the face of the whole land. And that DNA would have to still be here someplace. I've realized that, you know what, I've been doing scientific research now for 6 years. Maybe I should be doing scientific research on this subject. And that is when the project was born. So, a couple of things. Number one is that just to let you know, I want to be perfectly clear, the church has no official stand on geography. The church does not endorse this work. Okay, it is my work. When I say that, I also, because of I've done my very best to try to be straightforward on things, to give references and lay it all out as clearly and as succinctly as I can. I've tried to, but I want you to check the references and things that I have, and ultimately, really the best thing to do is to simply listen with an open mind. Now, when it comes down to learning, one of the things I learned in the scientific field is that there's 3 ways that you can go about learning. And one of them is when you get new information, is that you can look at it skeptically, or you can look at it affirmatively, or you can also look at it objectively. And my hope is that you'll look at the information that you're going to be presented tonight in as objective a fashion as possible. And that is the idea. The gospel says that we should learn by study and also by faith. But how do you learn by faith? Well, that's one of the things that has been instrumental in finding the answers to the research that has been happening, is being able to learn by faith. And the way that I say that is simply this. I already know that the gospel is true from a spiritual standpoint. If the gospel is true, then that means that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that the Book of Mormon, which is the foundation of our religion, is also true. If it is true, there has to be physical evidence in addition to the spiritual evidence. You can't have an entire civilization of people come and go and leave no trace. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So do I have a bias? Yes, I do have a bias. The bias is that I already know the answer, which is that the gospel is true. So that is quite unscientific. I understand that. In scientific endeavor, they say that you should just go with wherever it leads you. But when you already know the answer, that makes it easier to find the right questions. Without further ado, the presentation is actually called DNA Evidence for Book of Mormon Geography. And the evidence here that we're going to be talking about tonight is correlation and verification through DNA, prophetic, scriptural, historical, climatological, archaeological, social, and cultural evidences that I think you're going to be very excited about. But we're going to start a little bit about this. When you think of your ancestry, most of us think that we probably came from a family sort of similar to this. And then, how many of you have done genealogical research? Okay? And don't you every now and again you kind of find that you may have somebody a little more colorful in your background? Okay? Well, tonight we're not going to be talking about genealogy. We're going to be talking about genetics. And a little bit about that it warrants to have just a touch on the DNA, and that is that DNA has been used now for many years in courts of law. In fact, DNA is one of the few sciences that actually you can have a situation where, by the findings of this scientific methodology, someone could literally be sentenced to death over it. This is not a technology that is a lot of hocus pocus. It's not a lot of theoretical things. It's almost, if you want it, probably the best way is to compare it to a map. The map, the points on the map are either there or they're not. And they do change over generations, okay, but that's the reason why DNA is used in courts of law, is because it's quite exact. A little bit more about DNA. The human mitochondrion is an extranuclear organelle having, of course, DNA. And let's see, all the nucleotide positions and coding loci are known, meaning that we've been able to map those scientifically so we know where they're at. Okay? Now there are different segments, and we'll get into that I'm not going to get into a big detail about DNA because that's not what we're here for. But there's a couple of things that you need to know. One of them is that mitochondrial DNA is DNA that is passed from the maternal side, the maternal line. And in fact, this explains this a little bit better, is because this DNA is uniquely maternally inherited, and unlike nuclear DNA, does not recombine. All changes in mtDNA is mitochondrial DNA, which is, again, DNA from mother. Sequence are the result of accumulated mutations inherited from mother to daughter. In addition, mitochondrial DNA mutates an order of magnitude faster than does nuclear DNA, which makes it better for analysis at shallow time depths. This is very important, shallow time depths. When people are talking about courts of law, they're not talking about people who have been dead for 1,000 years. Okay? And so that's a little bit of a background as far as DNA. And now I need to just very quickly tell you a little bit about the present day theory of where we all came from. Okay, this is from Nature Journal, 1987 article, and essentially science has come down on this side. They tested DNA and found that because of how much humans have changed, and then how fast they see the change happening today, it would mean that it would have taken about 200,000 years for all humans to have diverged that much, okay, from the original DNA testing that was done. And so scientists call this woman, they call her either mitochondrial Eve or African Eve because of the predominant theory of the peopling of the earth. And so this is a little bit about that. All mitochondrial DNA stem from one woman postulated to have lived about 200,000 years ago, probably in Africa. Now, in order to, that stemmed from some preliminary research. Well, in order to get more accurate results from the research, what needs to be done is that they need to take DNA from further back and then see if that still holds. And so they actually exhumed the body of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Now they know exactly who his progenitors are through the maternal side from that, and we're able to trace them back to present day, his present day living ancestors. And when they did that, they found something quite astonishing. They found that the rate of mutation, now when I say mutation, I'm not talking about that he was turning into another species, okay? What I'm talking about is that there is a hypervariable area, and there's more of an area that is more what they call the control region. And when they look at the hypervariable region, that's what they typically are looking at when they're doing DNA studies. And they found that the amount of change happening between he and his current day ancestors was 26 times faster mutation rate than what they had anticipated based on the preliminary studies, which led to, in Science, the journal Science, 1998, in an article called Calibrating the Mitochondrial Clock, said researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose mitochondrial DNA was ancestral to that of all living people, lived about 200,000 years ago in Africa, using this new clock, this new calibration, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. Brothers and sisters, how close is that to what we understand from the scriptures? This is DNA showing at least the preponderance of a Eve that lived 6,000 years ago. But then I love this next sentence here. No one thinks that's the case. Okay? Now what just happened here? You have DNA evidence and you have theory. Okay? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that here in just a second, but you have data and theory. And sometimes those things don't match up. Now, this is a second witness. This is from Trends in Ecology and Evolution, 1997. They said the hypothetical descent of mankind from mitochondrial Eve has been much debated. And then they have the 200,000 years figure again. This research team sequenced 610 base pairs of 357 individuals from 134 independent mitochondrial DNA lineages and found that such a high mutation rate would indicate that Eve lived, what? About 6,500 years ago. And again, caveat, a figure clearly incompatible with current theories on human origins. So what happened when they had these twice now they had 2 witnesses of DNA showing that based on the mutation rate, that Eve would have been 6,000 years ago, right? Well, this is a couple of years later in Scientific American, August 1999 issue, that says the mystery of human origins is far from solved, but because DNA may not be as diagnostic as it once seemed. Why is it not as diagnostic as it once seemed? Because it put Eve at 6,000 years ago, not 200,000 years ago. Okay? So he says, we're back to the bones. See, it's really good that there are things coming from the fossil side. The DNA studies can just take the back seat. Now, can you see what happened? Data did not match the theory. So which was thrown out? They threw out the data. Okay? Is that good science? No, it's not a very good idea also, because we're a little bit later tonight in this presentation, you'll see that this comes up again. Okay? When theory doesn't meet data, you have to go with the data as long as it's good data, okay? And sometimes you have to throw out the theory. Now, what we're going to talk about tonight specifically are the American Indians. And this DNA controversy actually started back in 1990. You see, there was this law that was passed because the academic world would take remains of different Native Americans that they would find, and they would take them, study them, and so forth, and then they would lock them away someplace in storage and not give them back to the Indians. Well, the Indians, to them, this is sacred remains. They really want to have their remains back, and they didn't have any way to make the academic community give them back the remains. So they were able to get this law passed called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Now, what happened is that they said, we have a way of testing the DNA of the present-day Indians, the present-day Native Americans, and their remains, and so we can match them up. And so we can put them into the right things, because you see, one of the problems is that in a couple of instances, they had several different tribes claiming the same remains. And so they needed to have a way of being able to differentiate and make sure that the remains are going back to the proper tribe. Well, so they set out on about a 6 to 7 years quest and began doing DNA testing throughout the Americas. They tested Indians from North America, all the way from the Aleuts and up in Alaska, all the way through North, Central, and South America, to the tip of South America, and did DNA sequencing of all of these different groups. Now again, remember that the mitochondrial DNA is passed from mothers to daughters to daughters. Okay? Now, this is important to understand, because this is what our children are all being taught today in high school and in our universities. And that is that, now I call this a pseudo-theory for a reason. I know it's a kind of a new word. Okay. But the reason why I call this a pseudo-theory is because it's a theory that is taught today as an absolute established fact without empirical evidence to back it up. Now, there is some evidence, but we're going to show you tonight that there's evidence that goes against this theory. But this is the general theory, that Eve began about 200,000 years ago in Africa, moved up through Asia, over the Bering Strait during an ice age, okay? And after the ice age, then they moved into North and ultimately into Central and South America. And that is what we have all been taught and told. That's how the people of the Americas came forth. Is that correct? Okay, well, when they did this research, what they found actually is that most of it, in fact, virtually all of it, supported that idea of the Bering Strait. They found out that they could take, now there are what they call supergroups, then there are groups that are subdivided below that are called haplogroups. Now a haplogroup also can be subdivided again into clade, okay? right now we're just going to talk about the haplogroups. What they found is that in grouping the Native Americans from North and South America, that in grouping those together, that they could actually separate those into one of 4 primary haplogroups. And they, being the first to do the DNA studies, where they started with A, B, C, and D. So again, while widespread, the geographic distribution of the 4 haplogroups is markedly non-random. Haplogroup A is primarily up here in the Aleuts. Haplogroup B is found primarily in the American Southwest. And haplogroup C and D are found throughout North and South America. Now, these are not exclusive. You'll find parts and pieces in different areas. But these are the primary concentrations of these. And this is where the controversy began. All of these groups can today be linked directly with people from Asia, thereby supporting the Bering Strait idea. So, because they're all found over in Asia, and Lehi came from Jerusalem, now a couple of things that you need to know, and that is that there are, of the 3 primary races on the earth, they're quite easily distinguished from one another using DNA. In other words, it's quite easy to tell an Asian from a Caucasian, which in the scientific terms of DNA, they call them European. So that would be European-style DNA, Asian-style DNA, or Negroid DNA, okay? So it's quite easy to tell. Well, Lehi left Jerusalem. He would have been of the European variety, okay, of bloodlines. And they didn't find it. The initial studies came back that everything that was found was Asian DNA. Well, unfortunately, that kind of started a firestorm of things. There was a molecular biologist down in Australia. He was a bishop of the church. He saw what was happening with this and became very concerned. Now, he had some other issues with the veracity of the Bible and so forth as well. But his name was Simon Southerton, and he ended up leaving the church, wrote a book about it. That book went out. Several other LDS scientists have gotten a hold of the book. Many of them have been excommunicated or have left the church. It has become somewhat of an issue, but it really didn't become a huge issue until this little group. They heard about some of these LDS scientists who were leaving the church, and they decided, you know what, let's go out and interview them. And so that's what they did. They went out, brought a camera crew, and put together this documentary, again, called DNA versus the Book of Mormon. Now, this came out in 2002, the beginning of 2003. Let me just kind of give you a couple of quick ideas. This came out, like I said, in the beginning of 2003. Since that time, they actually told some colleagues of mine that they have been averaging between $3,000 and $8,000 per day in sales of this. Now, bear in mind, though, that it's about a 48-minute long video, and it's available for free on their website. How many of you have heard of YouTube? YouTube? Okay, you know what YouTube is? You can watch the whole thing for free on YouTube. But yet they're still having these kind of sales. Who is buying this? Anybody want to take a guess? Basically, every other Christian religion out there, because for the first time they have something that we have no answers for. And see, the thing about truth is if you find something that's true in science, is it ever going to not match up with truth in true religion? No. All truth at some point in time can be put into one whole, right? Okay? So if it's true physically, it also has to be true spiritually, and so forth. Well, situation is that the Christian denominations are buying these things up. Now, I can tell you that the entire city of Springville, about 2 months ago, almost every home was delivered that. I can tell you there's at least 4 other communities that I am aware of just here in Utah County that have had this video delivered to the homes. In the Bible Belt, it's worse. In Salt Lake, it's worse. Okay, missionaries are getting hit with this a lot. I was talking to, believe me, I've talked to several parents, and they have expressed very much concern because their missionaries are getting hit with this, and what's the answer to it? Now, why don't we find European DNA in the Americas? Now, the conclusion from this is very simple. The story of the Book of Mormon is told for the specific purpose of presenting another testament of Jesus Christ. The mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to convert people to believe in this additional testament of Jesus Christ that took place in the Americas. The archaeological, linguistic, and now this new DNA evidence confirm that the Book of Mormon and therefore this other testament of Jesus Christ are not historically true. If the story is fiction, then so are the characters, and so is its crowning event. This means the mission of the LDS Church is a fictitious account of Jesus Christ. Now, in this, one of the most powerful points was that they had an interview with President Hinckley in January of 2002 during the Winter Olympics. There was a German reporter that was there and asked President Hinckley this question in very heavy German accent. He says, "What will be your position when DNA analysis will show that in the history never have been an immigration from Israel to North America? It could be that the scientists will find out," and then President Hinckley kind of cuts in, he says, "It hasn't happened. That hasn't been determined yet. All I can say is that's speculative." No one really knows the answer to that. Not at this point. I want you to remember this. Not at this point. Because brothers and sisters, and back in 2002, this is a prophet of God speaking. And he nailed it. The answers to this DNA question weren't out yet. Unfortunately for these folks, they were a little premature at jumping to some conclusions on preliminary scientific data rather than waiting for all of it to come in. Because what you're going to see tonight is the rest of the story. Okay. All right. Now, in the meantime, as the Americans, as we were doing the DNA testing on the Native Americans over here, the Europeans were also doing testing over in Europe. And it came down to this. Now, everybody can read this? No, just kidding. Just take a look at this map. Okay, this is from Science Journal. This is that map bigger so that you can see it. They found, now the Europeans kind of started from the other end of the alphabet, and they found that there was this group called Haplogroup X, which were found in Finland, Italy, and Israel. They were actually confirmed there, as well as in Turkey, Bulgaria, and Spain. This is European-type DNA. They had a conference. The European investigators and the American investigators got together at this conference, and they got comparing notes, and they go, whoa, there's something interesting going on here. Something that we didn't see over in the Americas when we were doing it, but now we can see it because you have it over here in Europe. And they found out that there was some similarities between the European DNA, some of the European DNA, and the DNA that they really didn't know where to quite categorize it in the Americas. Now, some of this next portion is going to be chronological, so you can kind of see how the events unfolded. But this is essentially, this is from Science, 1998. Anthropologists have long assumed that the first Americans who crossed into North America by way of the Bering Strait were Asians. Okay? But recently they found surprising features on a handful of ancient American skeletons that resemble Europeans rather than Asians. The new data from a genetic marker called lineage X suggests a definite, if ancient, now if ancient is more of a question, okay, because there could be European DNA that was a result of admixture from post-Columbus and post-Vikings, okay? as they came. So they needed to verify if this is ancient and goes before Columbus and the Vikings. So they needed to find if there's a link between Eurasians and Native Americans. Now a new genetic study may link Native Americans and people of Europe and the Middle East. This is from Science, again, 1998. This is haplogroup X was different. They analyzed blood samples from Native American, European, and Asian populations and reviewed all of the published studies. I love this. We fully expected to find it, that is haplogroup X, in Asia, like the 4 other Native American markers, says Brown. But to their surprise, however, haplogroup X was only confirmed in the genes of a smattering of living people in Italians, Finns, and Israelis. Now, what does this mean? Okay. Curiously, haplogroup X is found in modern populations of Europe and southwestern Asia, but not in those of central Siberia, which is now regarded as the source for the peopling of the New World. See, how did this European DNA get into the Americas if it didn't come through Asia like it was supposed to have done? Okay, this is from American Journal of Physical Anthropology, 1999. Now, they go on to say, haplogroup X has now been reported in contemporary members of 7 specific, unrelated language families. Now, why is that important? Because you see, if they're related genetically, but they're not related linguistically, that makes them more ancient. Okay, because they've had time for their languages to diverge, but their genetics are still the same. Okay, or not exactly the same, but they haven't diverged as much as the language. Okay, which are distributed throughout the geographic regions of the Canadian subarctic Great Lakes region, and this confirms its legitimacy as a founding haplogroup. So now what we have, brothers and sisters, is we have A, B, C, and D, but then we also have this X in here, and it didn't come from Asia. Now, these guys also know about this, and they have 2 reasons why this DNA cannot be Book of Mormon DNA. 2 reasons. Number 1 is because finally they did find some of this X DNA in Asia, and they trot out this particular journal article about that. Unfortunately, however, they didn't read it as thoroughly as they should. They may have read the abstract, because when you get into the article itself, which we're going to go into in just a second, it addresses that. The second reason is because they found that this DNA is supposed to be too old. In other words, predating the Book of Mormon. But we're going to address that as well. This is from the U.S. News and World Report. Now, this is not one that I would typically use in a scientific situation, but they are quoting some, or not quoting, but they're relating to some other journal articles, so I just love the quote, so I decided to include it. It's called Wallace. Now, he was one of the primary investigators of the American DNA. He says, his newest and most surprising discovery is a set of genetic markers found only in the Ojibwa and other tribes living near the Great Lakes. The markers are not found in any other Native Americans or in Asia. We just don't know how it got there, he says, but it's clearly related to the European population. The simple answer would be that the DNA arrived with European colonists, but the strain is different enough from the existing European lineage that it must have left the Old World long before Columbus. This puts European DNA in the Americas before Europeans were supposed to have been here. Okay? But to confirm this, American Journal of Physical Anthropology, 2002. Now, this is towards the end of 2002. Remember, when did this come out? Beginning of 2003. The last research and so forth was in 2002. Then they had to do their editing and so forth, and so it could come out at the beginning of 2003. In this article, he says, we identified a prehistoric individual, radiocarbon dated to 1340 plus or minus years before present, that is a member of haplogroup X, found near the Columbia River in Vantage, Washington. He goes on and says, this verifies a prehistoric presence of haplogroup X in North America. They said the most convincing evidence that haplogroup X is not the result of Viking or even more recent European admixture would be its presence in ancient Native Americans. We confirmed the presence of haplogroup X in one prehistoric sample. Okay? To the best of our knowledge, this is the first evidence of haplogroup X in prehistoric America to be confirmed. And this verifies a prehistoric presence of haplogroup X in North America. Second witness. Evolutionary Anthropology, 2003 article. There is no way that these guys would have known about this. Okay? It says haplogroup X has been found in 2 individuals from a 700-year-old cemetery in west central Illinois. That predates Columbus, again, and the Vikings, right? Sequences are virtually identical to those of modern Algonquins from the Great Lakes region who are confirmed to be members of haplogroup X. The Algonquins from the Great Lakes region, okay, they have this X DNA. So I wanted to find out, well, who are the Algonquin Indians? What tribe are they? Well, actually, they're not a tribe. They're a language group. Okay, their subgroups are tribes, and these are some of the tribes. You have the Blackfeet, the Cheyenne, the Lenape, the Delaware. What I want you to pay attention to specifically is the Sac and the Fox and the Ojibwe Indians, because we're going to get back to that in a few minutes. So just kind of tuck that away for a second. This is from American Journal of Human Genetics, 2001 article. Haplogroup X is remarkable in that it has not been found in Asians. See, in 2001 it hadn't been found, suggesting that it may have come to the Americas via a Eurasian migration. The virtual absence of haplogroup X in Eastern and Northern Asia raises the possibility that some American Indian founders were of European ancestry. Okay, yeah, okay. In that case, as it has been proposed, haplogroup X was brought to America by the eastward migration of an ancestral white population. So see, they still can't get away from this idea that they came up through Asia. But there's been no trace so far been found in the mitochondrial DNA gene pool of modern Siberian, Eastern Asian populations. So they're going, well, we're not sure how they did it, but somehow they went from here all the way through Asia and didn't leave any trace. Okay? Okay? You see that? All right. So then this is the one that they came out. This is a 2001 article. It says, to extend the survey of Asian mitochondrial DNAs for the presence of haplogroup X, we screened mitochondrial DNAs of total 790 individuals for the markers that define this particular lineage, X, the X lineage. Haplogroup X mitochondrial DNAs were detected only in altanes at a frequency of 3.5%. Altanes are in Mongolia, which then would lend credence to the idea that if they found it in altanes, then they could have gone from there over. Okay, this is what they thought was the nail in the coffin to the Book of Mormon. They didn't read. See, that's one thing about researchers. You find that most researchers are kind of lazy. They read enough until they get what they think, and then that's it. This is what it said in the rest of the article. Okay, same article. It should also be noted that none of the Altean X mitochondrial DNAs harbor the 225A variant or, which is a marker for a major part of haplogroup X. However, the X mitochondrial DNAs that were detected in the Altean sample did not bear these 2 other variants, which are characteristic of most American Indian haplogroup X mitochondrial DNA. In other words, it didn't match. It's not the same group. They couldn't have come from the Altean group, okay, in the Americas because they didn't match. Then they also say that several West Eurasian Altean haplogroups, including X, were detected. Alternatively, a relatively recent gene flow mediated by women of European and West Asian ancestry could have occurred at the time of the expanding Mongolian Empire. See, rather than being ancient or more ancient, okay, which it would have had to have been if it was going to be the founding lineage of the American Indian groups, they found out that it actually is probably more likely related to Genghis Khan and his group moving into the area and then interpopulating with the population that was there, which is clear, up at 1200 A.D. Okay, so it didn't match up. Now that's the first thing. First up, they said, well, it can't be. This DNA can't be Book of Mormon DNA because, why? Because they found it in the Alteans over in Asia. Well, this just covered that. The second excuse why they said it could not be Book of Mormon DNA is because of the time frame. Now, let me tell you, when it comes down to living tissue, the longer it is allowed to just deteriorate, the harder it is to sequence the information from it. And so the older and older it gets, the less, the more difficult it is to get a good solid sample. So as you can see, you're getting back into some really old time frames here. Now, this is, again, I kind of find this funny because this is a kind of a catch-22 for these, for Living Hope Ministries, because here they said that the X DNA, haplogroup X, mitochondrial DNA from Europe and the Near East are found to have yielded similar coalescence time, that's important, okay, 17,000 to 30,000 years before present. Well, that obviously is long before the Book of Mormon. Lehi left Jerusalem at about what? About 600 years before Christ, right? Well, 17,000 years ago is obviously long before that. 17,000 years ago, by my calculation, is approximately 11,000 years before Adam and Eve were first on the earth. And now this is a Christian denomination, and they also believe that the Bible is literal. And so it's kind of funny that they're using something against the church that they also don't believe in. But anyway, so let's address that the dating issue here for a second, because now this is from Evolutionary Anthropology 2003. This is called Conceptions and Misconceptions of the Population Prehistory of the Americas, and in this, it still blows me away that they put this in there, but it is. It says a molecular clock first suggested by these two gentlemen in the 1960s. 1960s. Has been employed to use molecular divergence to date prehistoric events. Now, I have actually had geneticists attend this presentation, and then was invited to go to the office of one of them, and we had a nice long discussion. And he said, he says, one thing about it, Rod, he says, you got to understand that every time we see a mutation, we automatically click off 5,000 years. So if we see 2, that's 10,000. We see 3, that's 15,000. And it's not based on these other things which I showed you to begin with, where it went from 200,000 to 6,000 years, right? Well, the same kind of thing is happening here. They actually are trotting out theories that were clear back in the 1960s to do this dating. That's where this dating is coming from. In fact, this is from Annual Reviews of Genomics and Human Genetics, 2005 article. He said that he showed a model that includes a rate variation in the mitochondrial control region that gave an estimate for the age of the human mitochondrial DNA ancestor. It was half of that was obtained from a single mutation rate when that was assumed. I know that's a lot of scientific mumbo jumbo maybe, but what that's basically saying is that when they checked one individual and then checked it against the population, the individual the population ended up being half of what the original individual person's dating was. Well, how can that be happening? Half. That's a huge difference, okay? So he says, therefore, average age estimates of the mutation rate for human mitochondrial DNA do not reflect the true state of affairs and should be viewed as simplistic tools for phylogenetic studies. In other words, for establishing relationships, but not for establishing dating, okay? And then finally, he says, this means that care must be taken when using mitochondrial DNA to date phylogenetic events, as the underlying assumption of neutral, clock-like evolution may not hold. Okay? Why is that? Because what they found out was they were trying to do everything with the hypervariable area, and they found out a little bit later that not just the hypervariable area moved, but also the control region changed, which throws everything off. Okay, so what they're saying is, don't use DNA for dating old things. It's great for current day stuff, but not for old things. You can't use it for dating. Okay, same article says, although haplogroup X is now accepted as pre-Columbian Native American haplogroup, controversy still surrounds its origin. This is in 2003, okay? Why would there be this controversy? Okay, because it doesn't match the theory. Okay? While the other Native American haplogroups are found in Central and East Asia, haplogroup X has not until quite recently been identified that far east. This has led to the hypothesis, fueled by morphometric studies of the Kennewick Man remains in Washington State and other Paleo-Indian remains, that there was a prehistoric migration of Europeans to the New World. But why is this a controversial thing? Okay, because you see there's this disconnect in archaeology. Archaeologists kind of have this assumption that ancient people didn't really know how to build things called boats. And so they had to wait for an ice age in order to cross over on land bridges. Well, it's very interesting. There are a few scientists who understand this. American Journal of Physical Anthropology, 2002. I like this guy. He suggested that early Holocene Europeans used a transatlantic route to colonize the Americas. That's what his take on this DNA was back in 2002. And this goes on a little bit further. It's a 2003 article from Journal of Scientific Exploration. Pre-Columbian contact between the Americas and travelers from other continents and islands are highly probable, but the topic is taboo, okay, to mainstream American archaeologists. Why is it taboo? Again, because this means that if people had boats, they could travel. Will travel, have boat kind of thing. Okay? But here's some of the evidence he gives. Seagoing fishermen were in the North Atlantic in the first millennium BC, and probably earlier, indicated by bones of deep-sea fish in coastal sites of northeastern America. These people knew how to fish. They were going out and getting deep-sea fish and bringing them in and eating them, leaving the bones, right? Okay? In fact, he goes on to say the probability of transoceanic contacts before Columbus is so high that one might say it is a statistical certainty. Okay? Well, let me ask you, what is that? That's a boat, right? This happens to be on a wall in it's in one of the burial chambers in the Luxor area there in the Valley of the Kings of Edate, Lehi and his group. And my feeling is really simply this. I believe that people have known how to build a boat ever since Noah built one. Okay? All right. Now, so that brings us to this, this is really a critical article. This is from American Journal of Human Genetics, 2003, called Origin and Diffusion of Mitochondrial DNA Haplogroup X. The results of this study point to the following conclusions. First, haplogroup X variation is completely captured by two ancient clades. Now remember, clade is when you have a haplogroup and you subdivide the haplogroup. So we have haplogroup X. We're subdividing that into two clades. They call it X1 and X2. X1 is largely restricted to North and East Africa, whereas X2 is spread widely throughout Western Eurasia. Now, where is Western Eurasia? Okay, the Levant area or Jerusalem, the Holy Land, let's put it that way. It wouldn't be Jerusalem specific. Okay? Second, it is apparent that the Native American haplogroup X mitochondrial DNAs derive from the X2. In other words, not the ones that are from North and East Africa, which are here, but the ones that are from Western Asia, which are here on the map behind the words. Okay? Third, the few Altean and Siberian haplogroup X lineages are not related to the Native American cluster. So they come right out and say it. They're not related. So that eliminates those people. And they are more likely explained by recent gene flow from Europe or Western Asia. But the final of this is really where it gets exciting, brothers and sisters. Finally, phylogeography of the subclades of haplogroup X suggests that the Near East is the likely geographical source for the spread of sub-haplogroup X2. The presence of a daughter clade in northern Native Americans testifies to the range of this population's expansion. It is notable that X2 includes the two complete Native American X sequences. So what we have, brothers and sisters, is we have European DNA, which is found right in this general area, which matches up with DNA of modern Native Americans in this area. And they have no understanding of how it got there. You see, because it couldn't have come over through Asia. Who are the Druze? Anybody know who the Druze are? Okay. It's important because this is from BMC Evolutionary Biology, 2007 article. They were testing the Saudi Arabian population. They found that the Druze sample was significantly different from all the other populations, mainly because of a high frequency of haplotypes belonging to the minority haplogroup X. See, haplogroup X isn't the majority haplogroup over there, but it is a strong minority, 27%. So who are the Druze? The Druze reside, now this is from Statistical Abstract of Israel 2006, Israel Central Bureau of Statistics. Who are the Druze? The Druze reside primarily in Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, with a smaller community in Jordan. The Israeli Druze are mostly in Galilee at 70% and around Haifa at 25%. The Golan Heights, a region controlled by Israel but claimed by Syria, is home to about 20,000 Druze. So what we have is this. Now this is a little pixelated because I took this directly from the map in the article, okay, in the journal article. Figure 5, this is the worldwide distribution of haplogroup X frequencies. The Druze, 26.7%, located in Israel. The Ojibwe Indians, 25%, in the Great Lakes area of the United States and Canada, and Orkney, which is a small group off of these islands. Okay, those are the primary regions of this haplogroup X2 group. Now, a couple of things. This is one of the oldest images that I could find of some of the Great Lakes Indians, and I think it's kind of interesting because most Indians, we tend to see them, they have the feathers and so forth. The Great Lakes Indians wore turbans. Kind of interesting. Now, this one is critical. This is 2003, Evolutionary Anthropology. Though presently thought to be common among speakers of Algonquin languages, which is they've been verified as that fact. Okay. This also reaches a frequency of 20% in some Algonquin populations. It is geographically widespread throughout North America. I want that to sink in for just a second. This is throughout North America, okay? Among groups that are sharing no close historic or linguistic ties. So this brought me to the next thing. What about Central America? Okay, because where is the Book of Mormon supposed to have happened? In Central America. Okay, well, if you're trying to learn by study and also by faith, and we're told by our scholars that it happened in Central America, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to be able to find this information. Well, what I found was a 2005 article from American Journal of Physical Anthropology. And the article is titled, "Is Haplogroup X Present in Extant, meaning present day, South American Indians?" A total of 1,159 mitochondrial DNA samples from 25 South Native American populations was surveyed for the mutation frequently found in haplogroup X. Whoa. The results indicate that haplogroup X is not present in these samples. Up to now, among extant populations, X has only been found in North America. I was going, whoa, okay, hold on. Okay, 2005 article, Hispanic American Historical Review. Ancient Mayans and contemporary Mayans, haplogroups A, B, C, D, and X. Second witness. There's no European DNA in Central America or South America. It was found in North America. So as a researcher, I had a decision I had to make. Now we have some data. We have a theory. Which am I going to throw out? See, because the data is not matching the theory. The data is saying that there's European DNA in North America, but the theory is that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America. So now I'm faced with the same situation, same decision as the scientists were faced with the DNA. And I realized that, okay, we have to get back to the roots. We're going to have to go back to the very beginning and go from that point. Why is an understanding of the geography of the Book of Mormon important? Well, this is I took my clues here from Mosiah, where they said that perhaps they might bring them to the knowledge of the Lord their God, for they could not bear that any human soul should perish. Yea, even the very thoughts that any soul should endure endless torment did cause them to quake and to tremble. So another reason why it's important. Let me ask you a quick question. Which is greater, faith or knowledge? It says in Alma 32, it says, now behold, is your knowledge perfect? In that thing, when you've done the experiment, your knowledge is perfect in that thing, and your faith becomes dormant. And this because you know. So, faith is critical, okay? But it's supplanted by knowledge. I don't think God has faith that he can do things. He knows he can, okay? Because he's done it. And this brought me to another question that I needed to address. This is really an important thing. When we all were with our Father in heaven in this pre-existence, why couldn't we have just stayed there? Didn't we have a pretty good thing going on? We were with the Father. Things were good. Why did we have to come down here to earth? What is it that we needed to accomplish? Okay, well, we lacked knowledge, but we lacked one thing. We didn't have a body. And in fact, it says, and truth is knowledge of things. So truth is a knowledge about things, okay, as they are and so forth. There's a time element to truth. It has to be truth. It has to be true yesterday, today, and forever in order for something to be true. But it's also a knowledge of things. He says, for man is spirit. The elements are eternal. Okay? Man is spirit, that's spiritual. Elements are physical. Right? Elements are eternal. Joseph Smith told us that elements can't be created or destroyed. These are physical and spiritual. And spirit and element, inseparably connected, receive a fullness of joy. And when separated, man cannot receive a fullness of joy. The glory of God is intelligence, or in other words, light. What is light? It's an intangible, okay, spiritual. And truth, which is things, tangible, physical evidence. Light and truth forsake the evil one. So when you have spiritual evidence combined with physical evidence, what do you have? You have truth. Well, truth is just the physical part of it there. What do you have? You have a fullness of joy. And brothers and sisters, the founders of the gospel were, you'll see in just a couple minutes, they were very interested in finding physical evidence for the Book of Mormon, which led down unfortunately, some wrong roads in a couple of cases. But let me ask you a quick question. What is a paradigm? Okay, it's a way of thinking. Okay? Oh, it's a change of thinking. Okay. Well, that's if you're changing your paradigm, but what is just a paradigm in general? It's just a...
It's the way we see the world.
It's the way that's right, the way you see the world. Okay, well, I like all of your definitions, but I like mine better. That's a pair of dimes. Okay. Now, why would I have a pair of dimes in here? Who can tell me how much is a pair of dimes worth?
20 cents.
20 cents, okay? Paradigms are worth the 20 cents. Anybody disagree with that? It's time to change your paradigm. Because, I don't know if you noticed or not, but on the last one, these are 1964 dimes. Now, 1964 dimes from 1854 to then were made of 90% pure silver. Pure silver on the market today is about $14 per ounce as of a couple of days ago. Each dime is actually worth about $1.11, so they're worth $2.22, not 20 cents. Now, what just happened there?
Changed my paradigm.
But it changed the paradigm, but why? Because with new information, new conclusions can be reached. That may be what happens to some of you that are watching this DVD and that may be here tonight. And what I would hope is that you just, again, want to reiterate, listen to this with an open mind, and I think you will find it to be extremely exciting. Now, how should we begin our search for the lands of the Book of Mormon? Because see, we established that it's important that we get the geography right, because, you know, if you're looking for something in the wrong place, what are the chances that you're going to find it? Okay? So if we're looking for European DNA in the wrong place,
You gotta keep looking.
then we got to keep looking. That's right. We need to look somewhere else, okay, possibly. Well, one thing we do know is from the Book of Mormon and Alma, it talks about there's this narrow neck of land, right? Okay? Well, there's this narrow neck of land. So anybody see any narrow necks of land in this? Okay. All right. Panama. Well, this is page 6 of really what has become the Bible, if you will, of the Central American theory, which it's called An Ancient American Setting for the Book of Mormon. This is page 6. And again, it's all I'm showing here is that this is the beginning. This is how the whole thing started, okay, where its origin came from. Well, this is the Panama Canal area. Could this be the narrow neck of land? Well, there's one other thing about it. See, in the Book of Mormon, it does talk about that it was only a distance of a day and a half journey for a Nephite on the land bountiful, the land desolation from the east to the west sea, there being a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. So we have a second qualifier, that this narrow neck needed to be crossed by a Nephite. Now, it didn't say this is our fastest guy. Okay, this is a Nephite. I'm assuming this is a general population, okay, could cross this in a day and a half. Well, this is 40 miles across here. How many of you could walk 40 miles in a day and a half? Probably most all of us could, okay? The only thing about this is this is Panama. You see, this is swamp area over here. This is a mountain range here, and then this is jungle all back and forth here. It took about 6 months for the first survey crews, when they were they're preparing to do the Panama Canal. About half of those men died. It took them 6 months to get into the interior. It would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to cross this little point of land here, 40 miles, in a day and a half. But we don't really need to worry about that, because this is actually not where the Book of Mormon is supposed to have happened anyway. Okay? This is the proposed Mesoamerican setting for the Book of Mormon. It's a little bit dark, but you can see there's Mexico, Guatemala, Belize. This is the Yucatan Peninsula here. Okay? Now, in this, there are two potential places where there would be a narrow neck of land. This one right here is 150 miles. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a long jaunt for a day and a half. Now, when you add in the fact that this is jungle on this side, this is actually this dark green strip that goes through here is a very large mountain range. And then on the other side, there's a little bit more jungle, and then it goes to desert before it hits the ocean, the Pacific. Is it possible to cross this in a day and a half, 150 miles? Well, I did a bunch of research. I actually did research on travel times of all kinds of different groups, from military groups that went out, single individuals. The pioneers are a really good example. Okay, they averaged about 12 to 15 miles per day with wagons and so forth. Now, people on foot can actually cover more distance than that typically. But even so, now the world's record holder is a Greek individual, and he ran 180 miles in 24 hours. They call them ultra runners. They spend their whole life doing that. But he was also on a track, with tennis shoes on, okay, or with running shoes on, I should say. Okay, so is it possible? Not really. Now, this is even worse over here, 185 miles. So it appears that we have a little bit of a situation. Now, the scholarly accepted Mesoamerican geography, the Book of Mormon here, now this stems from this book. That's, just so you can see, it's the beginning of the book. Okay, that's how the theory was started. Okay. Well, from this book, these figures, 360 miles by 85 miles, is where those figures come from. Now, I do find it kind of interesting, though, because how many of you have heard of Zion's Camp March? Okay, the prophet Joseph took these men. Some of them were on horseback, some of them were on foot. They covered 1,000 miles in 60 days. And so what we're saying here is that the Nephites, who just came completely from the other side of the earth to this side of the earth, stayed in a little geographic location at less than a third of the distance that Joseph took the brethren in 2 months. Now, so did the entire saga of the Book of Mormon happen over over 1,000 years, occur in only this space? Well, it does give some questions there. So let me ask you this. Was the foundation of this a good scientific type of foundation? Did we start from, what is in the gospel? They say we should start from a what? A firm foundation. Okay? Was that a firm foundation? Now, we do know the Book of Mormon does talk about this narrow neck of land. That is a firm foundation. But what about where the narrow neck is? Do we know that's a narrow neck? No. So what is that? That's speculation. Okay? That's a theory. So we started actually with a theory. Let's see if we can start from a more firm foundation. And so the question then is this. Where in the Americas is the one location absolutely known to have been a Book of Mormon site? What's that? The Hill Cumorah. Okay, that's what I came up with as well. The Hill Cumorah, New York, USA. Beginning from this firm foundation, is there any qualifying narrow neck of land that can be found in the area and cross on foot in a day and a half? Well, let me give you a little close-up view here. Can you find any narrow neck of land that could be crossed in a day and a half? Okay, this is where the Hill Cumorah is. Just in case you can't see that, make it a little more clear. Now can you find any qualifying narrow neck of land that could be crossed in a day and a half? When I say qualifying, I need to be a little bit careful here, okay? But it says that there is this space. Now, didn't it say something about a sea east and a sea west? Okay, in actuality it didn't. It said from the sea west to the east, okay? But we're going to get that here in just a second. But this is 21 miles. Now, that, I think, is a doable distance for an average person. In fact, it works out almost perfectly with what the pioneers did at 12 to 15 miles per day. A day and a half would put you about 21 miles. And it's fairly flat terrain there. But then the question is well, Brother Meldrum, they said that these were seas. These aren't seas, these are lakes. These are the Great Lakes, right? Well, would the Book of Mormon people have considered these bodies of water to be seas? Well, who can tell me where that's located?
Israel.
This is Israel, okay? Anybody tell me what that is? That's the dead what?
Dead Sea.
Oh, Dead Sea. And what is this? The Sea of
Galilee.
the Sea of Galilee, right? So in the Holy Land area where Lehi came from, they already have the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, the Mediterranean Sea, which is obviously much bigger. So what constituted a sea? Well, it sounds like about any kind of body of water constitutes a sea. Now there is one little thing though. It says when they launched the boat into the water from the from the old world, they launched it into a body of water. What do they call that body of water?
Great Deep.
The Great Deep. That's right. So when they're crossing the oceans, it appears that they occasionally used what they call the Great Deep. But most everything else is a sea. Now, to kind of give you an idea, would these Great Lakes have qualified as a sea Well, this is the Sea of Galilee right here. You can easily see across it. There's a daytime shot, so you can kind of get an idea about the size of it. This is from one shore to the other side. This is Lake Ontario. Okay? This is another shot of Lake Ontario. I don't particularly like this shot. I love the sunset, but it has a bank of clouds there. Actually, there's nothing out there. That is Lake Ontario. I've been on Lake Ontario out in the middle of it. There are areas where you cannot see land in any direction. It's like you're in the ocean. Now, again, the question, would Lehi and his group have considered these to be seas? If these two seas were named geographically, what would they be named? In other words, if we found these, if you came up on these on another planet, we're just going to name them based on their geography, north, south, east, west. You could say, well, this is sea north, and this is sea south, right? But the thing about it is if you look at it, it's actually almost twice the distance from east to west as it is from north to south. So wouldn't it make more sense to call this sea east and that one sea west? Now, I'm not saying that this is sea west. I am going to show that I believe that this is sea east. Okay? We're going to get into that towards the end here. That moves us to the next. This is probably one of the most critical slides of the entire presentation. Because in scientific endeavor, you have to determine when things don't match up, when you have conflicting evidence, you have to make some kind of a determination which evidence is going to trump other evidence. Okay? Which has more validity, more veracity to it than others. And if you do that going in, it's much easier to be able to sort through the discrepancies. This is my hierarchy of evidence for doing this project. Now, I'm not saying that this is my hierarchy of evidence for my belief in the gospel, because there's one thing that's out of place. That is, I have Joseph Smith and his recorded revelations above divinely received revelations to modern-day prophets for one reason. And that is that I believe that Joseph Smith knew more about this particular subject of the Book of Mormon and its geography than any other person in this dispensation. So that is the reason why I made that change. Okay. Other than that, though, then come the revelations of modern-day prophets, Joseph Smith's written words, conference talks, corroborated writings and journals of others, first-hand accounts, historical compilations, personal communications of prophets and apostles. I have that clear down at number 8. Why is that? Let me just ask a question. Are apostles and prophets allowed to have personal opinions?
Yes.
Okay? Yes. If they can have personal opinions, can they occasionally be wrong?
Yes.
Okay? Well, so that you don't think I'm kind of, I decided I better have something backing me up here. Okay? So this is from the New Era, September of 2007. This is written by Bruce R. McConkie, Ordinary Man, Extraordinary Callings. In it, he says, Joseph Smith recorded that he visited with a brother and sister from Michigan who thought that a prophet is always a prophet. But I told them that a prophet was a prophet only when he was acting as such. That's from Joseph Smith. Thus, the opinions and views even of a prophet may contain error unless those opinions and views are inspired by the Spirit. Okay? Prophets are men, and when they act by the Spirit of inspiration, what they say is the voice of God. But still they are mortal men, and they are entitled to and do have private opinions. Okay? So I wanted so really, to me, it all boiled down to the first thing I needed to know, what did the prophet Joseph Smith know about the geography of the Book of Mormon? And it's exciting. How many of you have heard of the Wentworth letter? Okay, most all of us have. This is a source that is undisputed. Okay, nobody's questioning whether this is a real letter. And without going into all this, basically a couple of things about it. That the 13 articles of faith came from this. Joseph Smith said that he received this information by prophecy, by the Spirit. And then this is some of the background behind it. The Wentworth letter, in it, Joseph makes a couple of very profound statements. Joseph wrote, I was also informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country. Now what you're going to see here, in the next few minutes, you're going to see 3 times Joseph Smith testifies that he knew. Okay? This is number 1. Okay? I was also informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country and shown who they were, where they came from, a brief sketch of their origin, their progress, their civilization, their laws, their governments. And all this happened on this continent, he said. He goes on to say, the remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. What country is Joseph Smith in at this point in time?
United States of America.
It's in the United States, that's right.
After Missouri.
Okay? He says, this book also tells us that our Savior made his appearance upon this continent. Now, I went back and looked in Noah Webster Dictionary of the 1850s when Joseph Smith was around, and when it said continent, they're not talking about North and South America. Okay? There's a North American continent and a South American continent in Noah Webster's dictionary, which would be what would be currently used at Joseph Smith's time. Okay? How many of you have heard of the American Revivalist account? Okay, this is witness number 2. Now, again, this is not an account that is in any way disputed. This went out to thousands of people. It was in 1833. He penned a letter to the editor of the American Revivalist, which he described the Book of Mormon as follows. He said, the Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. Now, when he says western tribes of Indians, where's he talking about? He's in 1833 here. Okay. Ohio, Michigan, Missouri. That was the west. Further west, it was actually Mexico at that point in time. Okay? He says, by it we learned that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them. He also he mentions that this letter was written by commandment from God. So this is 2 witnesses. Joseph saying, I know where the Book of Mormon happened. Okay? Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mother, she also concurs in her own personal diary. She says, from this time forth, that Joseph continued to receive instructions from the Lord, and we continued to get the children together every evening for the purpose of listening while he gave us a relation of the same. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, their mode of travel, the animals which they rode upon, okay, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life with them. Brothers and sisters, he knew. Okay? This is the journey of Zion's camp. They went from the bottom of Lake Erie across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. Or Missouri, if you're from there. Okay? My mom's from there, so she corrects me on that. Okay? Let me ask you a couple of things about Zion's camp. What was the stated purpose of Zion's camp march?
Redeem the city of Missouri.
Okay? To basically take back the lands, right? So he got a kind of an army, and they went to go take back the lands. Did they accomplish the stated purpose of this journey?
No.
No. So was it a failed journey?
No.
Why not?
They accomplished everything.
That's right. Because 3 of the next prophets of the church gained their strength from this march. This is Zion's Camp March. What I did is I took this map right here, overlaid it onto a topographic map so that it's in the exact location. Okay? Here's the seas, or the lakes. Okay? And then here's where he took the brethren. 2 months, 1,000 miles. 2 significant things happened on this that place where Joseph thought the Book of Mormon happened. One was actually a letter that he hand wrote to his wife. Okay? Now, usually Joseph used a scribe. This is actually in his own personal handwriting. Nobody is questioning the validity of this letter. In it, he writes to his wife, "The whole of our journey in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds," I want you to remember that, the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as proof of its divine authenticity. Joseph Smith, Jr., signed. Okay? Now this is from Mound Builders of Ancient America, Robert Silverberg. In this, he has this vertical striped area that is related to what are known as the Hopewell or Mound Builder people. Now, if you take a look at their dating here, 400 AD, how well does that match up with Book of Mormon times? Yeah, it's within 20 years, 26 years. Now, 100 BC, how well does that match up? Not very well. That's 500 years off. Okay? But when you learn by study and also by faith, this will have an answer. You just have to let the Lord do his magic. Okay? Do his work. Okay? Now, there's also this Adena people who predate the Hopewell people up in this area. Now, when you take a look at this, now, I put this map onto the same topographic map as I had the Zion's Camp march on. When I got it all situated, I don't know how many of you know about Photoshop, but you can turn on and off different layers. I clicked on the Zion's Camp layer, because this is what I saw. Wandering over the plains of the Nephites, picking up their skulls and their bones as proof of its divine authenticity. If these people, now this is a postulation here, okay? If these mound building people were the Nephites, let's just say, for sake of argument, that they were, Joseph Smith just took the brethren from one side of their civilization through the center of it to the other side and stopped. How many of you have heard of the Zelf Mound incident? Okay, this is also Zion's Camp. June 2nd, 1834. Joseph Smith and several of the brethren on Zion's Camp march. Joseph brings them up onto a mound. Now, how many of you have been back east and have seen the mounds? Okay? There's literally thousands and thousands, even though they have been decimated by farming practices. But there are thousands and thousands of these mounds. And Joseph took the brethren up on a mound, about 12 of them. Then he said, "Get me a shovel." So when he got the prophet a shovel, he dug down about a foot, it said. Now, a couple of quick things. This is a highly corroborated event that happened. There were 8 different witnesses to this. 3 of them became prophets. Okay? This is recorded in their personal journals. So this is not Joseph Smith himself writing it, but it is a highly corroborated event. Now, what they said is that he dug down, he found some bones. He dug a little further, and he found it was a rib cage. And in the rib cage, there was an arrowhead. 8 different individuals testify that this is what happened. He said that Joseph got up on the mound and he said, "The visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty." What is Joseph having here? He is having a revelation. That's right. He says, "I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large thick-set man, and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle with the Lamanites and the Nephites. Now, he said last great struggle. He didn't say the last great battle. But did he just give us some clue about the geography of the Book of Mormon? He said that it was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, apparently relating those two, to the Rocky Mountains. And they're right in the middle of it on Zion's Camp March. Okay? This is what that mound looks like today. It's called Russell's Maple Mound number 8. Still there. That is a person standing on that mound right there. Give you an idea of the size of these. Okay? They are all over back east. Another shot of that. This is about a year ago. So then the question came, well, where did Joseph Smith place the hill Cumorah? Because you see, if wherever the Book of Mormon happened, there had to have been a hill Cumorah there, okay? Because the people had the hill there. So if it happened in Central America, then there would have had to have been a hill Cumorah there. But yet the plates were found up in New York, so there was this problem. So thus was the two Cumorah theory born. How many of you have heard of the two Cumorah theory? Okay? That's the reason why that it's there. But so I went back to the scriptures. Well, Joseph Smith history, it says, convenient to the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, stands a hill considerable size, most elevated of any of the neighborhood. This is where the plates came from. Now, it has been argued, well, we don't know if that's actually the actual hill or it could be another hill. And my response to that is that whether it's that hill or another hill in the area, Joseph did not get any plates from Central America. They were somewhere in New York. Okay? Now, it has been specifically said, though, by succeeding prophets that is the hill where Joseph received the plates. Okay? But, it is kind of interesting, though, here, section 128, it talks about glad tidings from Cumorah. All of these different things, the three witnesses bear record and so forth. Peter, James, and John, the wilderness of Harmony, Susquehanna County. And I started realizing all of these things, where are they all located at? Where was the original Garden of Eden located? Missouri. Where was the church restored? What country? United States. I mean, I started putting these things together and just like, whoa, thing after thing after thing. I started thinking, well, how many really significant things have happened in Central America of this magnitude? And I started coming up with the big blank, and I was like, okay. Well, how many Cumorahs are there? Well, here in Moroni, it says, it came to pass when they had gathered in all the people and one in the land of Cumorah, Mormon, began to be old. Therefore, I made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and I hid them up in the hill, all of the records. 8 different people said that they went into the hill, and that there were wagon loads of plates there. Okay? It is interesting, though, because in the Book of Mormon, the internal consistency doesn't indicate at all that there was ever a second hill. There is no indication at all that there was 2 hills. In fact, it continues to go back to the same hill. In fact, here's another example. In Ether, it says, it came to pass that the army of Coriantumr had pitched their tents by the hill Ramah, and it was the same hill where my father Mormon did hide up the records to the Lord. They keep going back. This is the same hill. There is no indication of more than that. Then the next question was, where did Joseph Smith send the missionaries? Because you see, in September of 1830, according to the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph Smith was given a direct commandment from God. Go to the Lamanites. Now, either Joseph Smith was seriously lackadaisical, or he sent them to the right place. Because, you see, if it was in Central America, the first missionaries didn't arrive there till 117 years later. The first 4 missionaries entered Guatemala. But, Joseph Smith was not a slacker. Okay? When God told him to do something, he got on it. Now, see, he says, now behold, I say unto you, you shall go unto the Lamanites and preach my gospel unto them. Same month. He didn't even wait for, okay, Lord, but just give me a couple of weeks. No, he got right on it. He says, right here, and now behold, I say unto you, Oliver Cowdery, shall go unto the Lamanites and preach my gospel unto them. The next month, he sends Peter Whitmer Jr. He says, you shall take your journey with Oliver Cowdery and go among the Lamanites. Then he says, Parley P. Pratt, you're next. Okay? I want you. But this one is interesting. He says, and that which I have appointed unto him, who's the Lord? This is the Lord, right? Appointed unto Parley P. Pratt, that he shall go with my servants Oliver Cowdery and Peter Whitmer Jr. into the wilderness among the Lamanites. Now this is God speaking. I think he's probably going to know where the Lamanites are located at. Now if he told Joseph is another question, okay? But this is where Parley P. Pratt says in his autobiography, page 56 to 61, he says, thus ended our first Indian mission, in which we had preached the gospel in its fullness and distributed the record of their forefathers among 3 tribes. Now let me tell you one quick thing. Joseph Smith got some of the fresh copies that were just being printed off of from the Book of Mormon. He gave it to the brethren. He gave them a charge. He says, you take this to this and this and this tribes, and you tell them, this is a history of your ancestors. This is not some mythological thing. This is genealogical. Okay? Well, who did he go? Who did they send him to? They went to the Indians in Buffalo, New York, in Ohio, and Missouri. A little reminder, who are some of these tribes? You see, I find it very interesting that Joseph Smith sent the first missionaries to the tribes that today have haplogroup X DNA. And I don't think that that's coincidental. Where did Joseph himself go to preach the gospel unto the Lamanites? Well, he said, I conducted them to the meeting grounds in the grove. This was in Nauvoo. Okay, he had a bowery there. This is the 3rd time now that Joseph Smith testifies that he knew the geography. He says, and instructed them in many things which the Lord had revealed unto me concerning their fathers. Who was he talking to? Well, this is from History of the Church, Volume 4. This was the visit to Joseph Smith of the Sac and the Fox Indians to Nauvoo. Want a little reminder here? These are the same Indians that have the European-style DNA. And Joseph Smith himself preached the gospel to them. And he said that he knew because it was revealed unto him. So then here's June, a year later. And thus you, Newell Knight, shall take your journey into the regions westward, to the land of Missouri, to the borders of the Lamanites. Anybody get the feeling that Joseph Smith's confused about this issue? No. Okay. Neither do I. It's again and again. But there is some confusion because there have been several things attributed to Joseph Smith that he believed that it was in Central America. Now, I bring this up because I've had several people said, well, Brother Meldrum, you're only showing one side of the story. And that's not good research. I'd already done the research, so I already knew the answer, but I left it out originally because it was a little on the negative side and so forth. But people have a lot of questions about this, and so I decided to go ahead and put it back in. This is Joseph Smith on Central America. Okay, this is the foundations of the theories of Central America. They all stem from one of 4 primary documents that happened. 2 of them came from the Times and Seasons, September 15th and October 1st of 1842. The other 2 are actually both associated with a gentleman by the name of John Bernheisel. He was a bishop of the church up in New York. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that here in just a second. The Times and Seasons, now a couple of things I need to address here. Okay? The Times and Seasons, September 15th, 1842 edition. This is what was written. They actually took an extract. Now I'm going to give you a little quick background. Brother Bernheisel, the bishop in New York, had become quite enamored with a 2-volume book set from John Stevens. It was called Incidents of Travel in Central America. Now, in John Stevens' book, he has all this information about the pyramids and so forth down in Guatemala and that area, okay, in Central America. Now, he was desirous to get that information to Joseph Smith. Why would he want to do that? Because remember when I was talking about how they wanted to get physical evidence for the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. They were all interested in that. Well, he wanted to get this to Joseph Smith. He found out that Wilford Woodruff was returning from his mission in Europe at the time, and so he and Wilford Woodruff joined up in New York. He gave Wilford the book set, and then Wilford Woodruff took them to Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, as I guess he was probably reporting his mission. Okay. As he did so, now this is purely speculation, but I would guess that he might have been interested to find out what it was that was in the books. Okay, we don't know that or not, but what we do know is that at September 15th of 1842, an extract from one of those books was printed in the Times and Seasons, and this is at the same time when Joseph Smith was the editor, the chief editor of the Times and Seasons. Now, a lot of people have said, well, that must mean that Joseph Smith must have approved this if he was the chief editor before it went in, which means that he would have to have agreed to this. And at the surface, that sounds like a logical thing, but you have to do your research. What I found was a couple of things. Now, this is, first off, you need to look at the actual document itself. This is what it says. Now, see, they had this extract here from this Incidents of Travel in Central America. Then there was some editorial that was attached to the extract from the book. In that editorial, this is what was said. And now I want you to, as you read this, to see, is this how Joseph spoke? Is this how he wrote? He says, the foregoing extract has been made. We are sorry. Now they said we. So who's we? Joseph Smith, Okay. We are sorry that we could not afford the expense to give necessary cuts referred to in the original. Let us turn our subject, however, to the Book of Mormon, where these wonderful ruins of Palenque are among the mighty works of the Nephites, and the mystery is solved. He goes on to say that the history of the Nephites in the book, they lived about the narrow neck of land, which now embraces Central America with all the cities that can be found. Well, that sounds pretty convincing that this is maybe in Central America, right? And Joseph Smith was the editor at the time. But there are some challenges with this account. First off, several months prior to this was September, right? January 28th of the same year, Joseph Smith received a revelation that the 12 are the ones that should be responsible for the times and seasons. He says, I received the following revelation. It is my will to have them take in hand the editorial department of the times and seasons. So actually, Joseph Smith had already given the editorial responsibilities over to the 12 about, 9.5 months prior. The other thing is that although Joseph had taken over editorship responsibilities as the chief editor, Joseph Smith also declared the following in his first edition of the Times and Seasons, which came out in March of 1842. So this was still many months before these other two articles. He says, this paper commences my editorial career. I alone stand for it, and shall do so for all papers having my signature henceforward. Guess what, brothers and sisters? Neither one of these articles were signed by Joseph Smith. In fact, when I did some more research on this, Joseph Smith was in hiding at the time that these came out. Because what had happened is, you see, Governor Boggs, somebody took a pot shot at him, and then he blamed Joseph Smith and Orrin Porter Rockwell, and then they came to arrest Joseph, and then they didn't have the proper paperwork, so they said, oh, you just wait here, we'll come back and arrest you later. And Joseph said, you know what? I'm tired of this. I mean, he's just been through Liberty Jail, all this kind of stuff. He said, I'm not doing it anymore. Not playing this game. And so he left, which now made him a fugitive of the law. And he went into hiding. He was in hiding for 2 weeks before September the 15th. He didn't come out of hiding until October the 20th, which was about 3 weeks after the second version. Whoever was writing these as an editorial, and most of the LDS scholars that have done some research on this understand that this is not Joseph Smith writing this stuff. This is somebody who was also enamored with these two books, okay, from Brother Bernheisel. Now, October 1st edition, because they didn't get any feedback apparently from the September 15th edition, 2 weeks later they got a little more bold. They said, they had another extract, and they said, since our extract was published from Mr. Stevens' Incidents of Travel, we have found another important fact relating to the truth of the Book of Mormon. Central America, or Guatemala, is situated north of the Isthmus of Darien and once embraced several hundred miles of territory from north to south. The city of Zarahemla, burnt at the crucifixion of the Savior and rebuilt afterwards, stood upon this land. This is firm fact, right? It says important fact that stood upon this land. They're making bold statements here, right? Whoever it is that's writing this. Well, it's kind of interesting because this is the first paragraph. This is the next paragraph. It says, we're not going to declare positively that the ruins of Coringa are those of Zarahemla. I mean, they just stated that as a fact, and now they say, well, we're not really positive. Okay, but when the land and the stones and the books tell the story so plain, we are of the opinion. Now, how many times do you remember Joseph Smith writing that? You know, in my opinion, we ought to. No, that's not how Joseph Smith was. Okay? Now, it would require more proof that the Jews could bring the proof that the disciples stole the body of Jesus from the tomb than to prove that the ruins of the city of question are not the ones referred to in the Book of Mormon. Brothers and sisters, they really wanted to find some serious physical evidence for the truthfulness of the gospel as established by the Book of Mormon. Unfortunately, they were looking in the wrong place. All right, John Bernheisel. This is important to know this little detail of history. On November 16th, Joseph acknowledged the gift that he received from Wilford Woodruff of these two books. In it, and this is one place where a lot of people have said, oh yeah, well this is where Joseph Smith said that it's the Book of Mormon and it's down there in Central America. There's 3 paragraphs in this letter. The first 2 I have here. The third one is actually a real estate deal between Joseph and and Mr. Bernheisel was going to come and move back to Nauvoo. Anyway, he says, this is one sentence, by the way, I received your kind present by the hand of Elder Woodruff and feel myself under many obligations for this mark of your esteem and friendship, which to me is the more interesting as it unfolds and develops many things that are of great importance to this generation and corresponds with and supports the testimony of the Book of Mormon. Breath. Okay. I have read the volumes with the greatest interest and pleasure, and must say that of all the histories that have been written pertaining to the antiquities of this country. Now, what country were these books written about? They're called Incidents of Travel in Central America, right? Okay? It is the most correct, luminous, and comprehensive at the time. What was Joseph Smith saying there? Did he just make a direct connection between the Book of Mormon and Central America? I don't see it. He's talking about his friendship up here and how wonderful it is to have a friend such as Mr. Or Brother Bernheisel. And then he says, he's trying to change gears, and he says, well, this is a very correct book for that area. He didn't make the connection that I can see. Now, that leads us to the Bernheisel manuscript. About a year after Joseph Smith was assassinated, Brother Bernheisel, and by the way, they were close friends, Joseph and Brother Bernheisel. Brother Bernheisel asked him if he could get the transcripts from as Joseph was working on the inspired version of the Bible. And so she sent them to him. He was going to do he was going to transcribe them, basically. And these are a couple of things that came from the Bernheisel manuscript. Now, this is probably one of the most common ones people bring up to me quite a bit. He says that, now this is from Unpublished Revelations by Fred C. Collier, 1979. By the way, he left the church after he wrote this. He says, this is a revelation given to the prophet Joseph Smith. like that was an established fact. But then he says, but the exact date that this revelation was given is not known. Well, historically and from an authenticity standpoint, that's not a very good sign. That's big red flags. But it is possible that it was given during the dedicatory services of the Kirtland Temple in March 1836. In this, it says they traveled nearly, that this is talking about Lehi. Okay? Lehi traveled from the city of Jerusalem to the place where his family took ship. They traveled nearly south-southwest direction until they came to the 19th degree north latitude, then nearly east to the Sea of Arabia, then sailed in the southeast direction, then landed on the continent of South America in Chile, 30 degrees south latitude. Now if that came from Joseph Smith, that would give you a pretty good indication of where Joseph thought they landed, right? Well, look at this. This is in his book. He says, the historical background concerning this revelation is not known. It was found written in the Bernheisel manuscript and is assumed that it was received by Joseph Smith. Well, unfortunately, the Bernheisel manuscript had some other issues. This is from BYU Studies. Okay, Bernheisel manuscript is an interpretive copy of the originals and could not have been the basic source for Moses and Matthew materials in either of these editions of the Pearl of Great Price. Dr. Bernheisel did not make a simple transcription of the originals, but did some adapting, interpreting, judging, and thinking for himself. He also made some explanatory comments beyond the content of the original documents that he was copying. This is not a serious contender as far as veracity and validity as a document. It's got all kinds of red flags that would be there. This next part, I originally considered not having this in. But it is important for one reason. In the gospel, we know that it is by their works that you shall know things, by the fruit, right? What is the fruit of the Central American theories? Now, originally I had the names and the references, but I have deliberately withheld those because this is not about the individuals. This is about where the individuals had to go in order to place the Book of Mormon in Central America. And these are direct quotes from their written words. Okay? Since Moroni offered Joseph Smith only a brief sketch, it is unlikely that he revealed to Joseph a comprehensive knowledge of Native American origins. It is important to understand that Joseph Smith did not have access to this knowledge. He translated the book, but apparently did not know the scope of its geography. How does that fit with the 3 times Joseph Smith testified he knew? Not very well. This is the kind of stuff that the anti-Mormons just love. They love to see our LDS scholars dismissing Joseph Smith. Because they know, they can see these things that Joseph Smith has written, and they're not being followed by the scholarly community of the church, unfortunately. Exactly what Joseph Smith believed at different times in his life concerning Book of Mormon geography in general is also indeterminable. I think it's quite clear where Joseph Smith thought it was. Evidently, Joseph Smith's views on this matter were open to further knowledge. And then the granddaddy of them all is actually this book. Page 1, 3rd paragraph. It says, the historical sources give no indication that Moroni's instructions to young Joseph Smith included geography, nor did Joseph Smith claim inspiration on the matter. Ideas he later expressed about the location of events reported in the book apparently reflected his own best thinking. Those are the fruits of trying to place the Book of Mormon geography in Central America. So this is the Ensign, December of 2005. President Gordon B. Hinckley is what he had to say about this. He says, it is a constantly recurring mystery to me how some people speak with admiration for the church and its work, while at the same time disdaining him through whom, as a servant of the Lord, came the framework of all that the church is, all that it teaches, and all that it stands for. They would pluck the fruit from the tree while cutting off the root from which it grows. Now, who is he talking about here? Is he talking about anti-Mormons here? Well, whoever these people are, they've plucked the fruit. They've already received some of the fruit, but they're cutting off the roots. That is my bottom line. Joseph knew. So let's talk about, I think we've tried to establish a firm foundation of where Joseph thought it was, but that's not good enough because the Book of Mormon also testifies to some things. We need to find out, what does the Book of Mormon itself say? So this next group, this next section actually, is actually one of my favorite ones. And what it is you've heard of scriptural chains, right? Where you connect one scripture to the next to the next. Well, I like to call this section a scriptural chain mail. Okay, you know what chain mail that the armor that the knights and so forth wore? Okay, this is scriptural chain mail. That's where each link isn't just linked onto one other link, because if you have one weak link, then you got a problem. This is links upon links. Okay, and I think it's very powerful. But this is the question: does revealed scripture testify to the geographical location of the Book of Mormon? Well, let's take a look at this. In Doctrine and Covenants 42, verse 61, it says, "Thou shalt ask, it shall be revealed unto you in my own due time where the New Jerusalem shall be built." Now, about a month and a half or so later, the Lord gave the prophet another revelation here in D&C 45. He says, "Gather ye out from the eastern lands, go ye forth into the western countries." He says, "And it shall be called the New Jerusalem." So now we know that it's going to be in the western countries is where this New Jerusalem is going to be. Well, about a year and a half or so later, the Lord fulfilled his promise to Joseph Smith by this revelation in D&C 84, wherein he says, "A revelation of Jesus Christ unto his servant Joseph Smith Jr., to stand upon Mount Zion, which shall be the city of New Jerusalem, which city shall be built beginning at the temple lot which is appointed by the finger of the Lord in the western boundaries of the state of Missouri. That the city New Jerusalem shall be built beginning at this place, even the place of the temple." So now we know Missouri, USA equals the New Jerusalem. Everybody agree with that? Okay, good. Okay. Section 45, "And it shall be called the New Jerusalem, and it shall be called Zion." Pearl of Great Price, Moses, it says, "And it shall be called Zion, a New Jerusalem." And then, of course, most all of us could quote this. "We believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent." Okay, Article of Faith, number 10. So now we know Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, which also equates to Zion. Now, is it the Zion, because there's been more than one Zion. We're talking about the Zion that is dealing with the Book of Mormon here. Okay. Section 57. Hearken, O ye elders of my church, saith the Lord, in this land, which is the land of Missouri, this is the land of promise. Missouri is the land of promise. And the place for the city of Zion. So there's double links there. And Independence is the center place. So now we know this Missouri, USA, the New Jerusalem is Zion, which is also the land of promise. Okay? Then we go to the Book of Mormon. This is the Book of Mormon testifying of itself here. It says, New Jerusalem will be upon this land. Well, this is the Book of Mormon authors writing this. What was the real estate that they were standing on? Okay? Whatever that real estate is where this New Jerusalem is going to be built. And the New Jerusalem is going to be built where? Missouri, right? And that a New Jerusalem shall be built upon this land unto the remnant of the seed of Joseph. So there's two examples of the New Jerusalem being this land of the Book of Mormon. When they say this land, this is where we know where we're talking about. Okay? Now, this is from 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 5. Notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained a land of promise. Now, we already covered that. But they also said this is a choice land above all other lands. What does it mean to be above all other lands? Does that mean the average elevation above sea level is higher than anywhere else? Because Himalayas, I think, would probably win that one. Well, what does it mean to be a choice land? Well, I did some pondering about that. And something very profound to me came, and it may not be that amazing. But wouldn't a choice land be a land where people would choose to live? If it's a choice land, you would think that people would choose to live there. Well, so it's a choice land above all other lands for the inheritance of thy seed, and all those who should be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. So we know that this land of the Book of Mormon is also a choice land above all other lands. Well, Alma 46:17 says it's the chosen land and the land of liberty. Now it makes sense. Why would people choose to live in this land? Because whatever this land is going to be known as the land of liberty. Okay? So now Zion, so forth, this land, choice land, is known as the land of liberty. Okay? This one's critical. 1 Nephi 13 says, nevertheless, thou beholdest that the Gentiles who have gone forth out of captivity. Now, what Gentiles came forth out of captivity? You see, the French, they came not out of captivity, they actually came to conquer. Right? I'll give you a couple of other clues. They've been lifted up by the power of God above all other nations. What is a nation? It's a political boundary, right? Okay. Well, if it's a nation, then it cannot be all of North and South and Central America, because that's not a nation. Whatever this is, it's got to be a nation that is going to be above all other nations. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean militarily? There's a lot of different things that could be. Okay, that could be above all other nations in spirituality. Could be a lot of different things. But it's upon the face of the land which is choice above all other lands that his seed should have for the land of their inheritance. Okay? It also says that the Lord God will not suffer that the Gentiles will utterly destroy the mixture of thy seed, which are among thy brethren, neither will he suffer that the Gentiles shall destroy the seed of thy brethren. Okay, so whatever this land of liberty, this choice land is, it's also a nation, and it's above all other nations. So where exactly is the Book of Mormon's promised land? Well, what nation makes up all the promises, makes up the Book of Mormon's promised land? Well, part of the reason why it's called a promised land is because there's promises given in the Book of Mormon about this land. Whatever this nation is has to fulfill the revelations given in the Book of Mormon prophesying about the things of this land. Well, let's take a quick look at some of those prophecies here. Who are the Gentiles prophesied of in the Book of Mormon? Because it does talk about the Gentiles. Okay? It says in 1 Nephi 13, came to pass that I beheld the Spirit of God, that it wrought upon other Gentiles, and they went forth out of captivity upon the many waters. So we know that wherever these Gentiles were going to come from, they were going to come across the ocean to get here. Okay? Okay? But this nails it down a little bit further, because, see, it could be any Gentiles that came over from Europe. But this is from the Book of Mormon itself. 1 Nephi 13:35 says, for behold, thus saith the Lamb, I will manifest myself unto thy seed, that they shall write many things, and after thy seed shall be destroyed. See, Nephi knew that was going to happen. After thy seed shall be destroyed, and dwindle in unbelief, and also the seed of thy brethren are going to dwindle in unbelief. Behold, these things shall be hid up, to come forth unto the Gentiles. by the gift and power of the Lamb. Who are these Gentiles? Well, who brought forth the record that was hid up? Joseph Smith. His ancestors. The Gentiles of the Book of Mormon are the predecessors of Joseph Smith, who brought the record forward. And who were they? They were American colonists. Let's read a couple of other things here. This is from 2 Nephi chapter 10. This land shall be a land of liberty unto these American colonists, these Gentiles. Okay, it's going to be known as the land of liberty. There shall be no kings upon this land, and I will fortify this land against all other nations. And he that fighteth against Zion shall perish, saith God, for he that raiseth up a king against me shall perish. For I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king. Brothers and sisters, the first nation ever established by Christian principles, brought forward by men of God who came here and established the Constitution. Okay? That I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king. Told right here, prophesied to us in the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi 13, and I beheld that their mother Gentiles were gathered together upon the waters and upon the land also to battle against them. Book of Mormon again. These are all scriptures, brothers and sisters. I mean, I'm not using some off-the-wall reference, okay? And I, Nephi, beheld that the Gentiles that had gone out of captivity were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of all other nations. This ringing some bells? Okay. All right. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, beheld that they, the Gentiles, did prosper in the land, and I beheld a book that was carried forth among them. Behold, it proceedeth out of the mouth of a Jew. Whoever these Gentiles were also going to bring the Bible with them out of captivity. 2 Nephi chapter 1, verse 7, and if it so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he hath given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them, wherefore there shall never be brought down into captivity. Section 98, and that law of the land which is constitutional, supporting that principle of freedom and maintaining rights and privileges, belongs to who? To all mankind, and is justifiable before me. As far as I know, this is the first and only time that a government, that a political entity, or not a political entity, that a national form of government has actually received a stamp of approval by God himself. It says it belongs to all mankind. So what nation then fulfills the prophecies concerning the Book of Mormon's promised land? They would have to have, the Gentiles would be blessed upon the land. It would be a land of liberty. There would be no kings. It'll be fortified against all other nations. It will contain Zion and the New Jerusalem. The Gentiles will afflict the Lamanites, but ultimately they will be like a father to them. Gentiles will bring the record of the Jews, of the Bible, to the Lamanites. The Book of Mormon is to come forth from these particular Gentiles. The gospel will be restored upon this land, and those who fight against it shall perish. Anybody want to take a guess what land we're talking about? Okay. Okay. The only nation that fulfills every Book of Mormon requirement to be the promised land is the United States of America. Now, I'm not just trying to be rah-rah here, okay? This is from Revelation. This is from the Scriptures. Okay? D&C 28. Now, behold, I say unto you that you shall go unto the Lamanites and preach my gospel unto them. And now, behold, I say unto you that it is not revealed, and no man knoweth where the city of Zion shall be built. This is the predecessor to before God showed Joseph where the New Jerusalem was going to be built, in the city of Zion. But he says, behold, I say unto you that it shall be on the borders by the Lamanites. And thus you, Newell Knight, shall take your journey into the regions westward to the land of Missouri, to the borders of the Lamanites. Missouri, USA equals the border of the Lamanites. City of Zarahemla. When I show people this, a lot of times they don't believe that this is real. Okay? But in Doctrine and Covenants section 125, the Lord gave a revelation to Joseph in which he says, "Let them build up a city unto my name upon the land opposite the city of Nauvoo, and let the name Zarahemla be named upon it." Now that doesn't match up with the Times and Seasons where they said that Zarahemla was in Central America. This is God saying Zarahemla. Now, is it the same Zarahemla? Well, we don't know that for sure. Okay, but one thing I do know is that when God names places, he's only done it a few times, a handful of times. And as an example, when he had this place over in the old world called Jerusalem, when he established a new one over here, did he call it Jerusalem? He called it the New Jerusalem. Okay, I think when God names something, it means something. Okay, well, he named this land on the other side. Now, this is Nauvoo, Illinois, right here. On the other side of that river is where God told Joseph to put together a town or a city named Zarahemla. Alma 6:7. Let me ask you this question. On which side of the Sidon River was the city of Zarahemla located? In the Book of Mormon. This is quiz. Okay. And now it came to pass that when Alma had made these regulations, he departed from them, yea, from the church which was in the city of Zarahemla. So he left the city of Zarahemla and went over upon the east side of the river Sidon into the valley of Gideon. Now we know the river Sidon ran north and south because it had east-west banks. Okay, now we don't know whether it ran north or ran south. Doesn't specifically say that. But we do know it was one of those two. And we do know that the city of Zarahemla was on the west side of the Sidon River. There's actually 3 different times that that comes up. So here's the Nauvoo Temple. Now, this is the Book of Mormon geographic, what I call map anchors. These are places that you can put in there that are by revelation known to be firm places for establishing a geographic map of the Book of Mormon. Number 1 is we know where the hill Cumorah is. Number 2, we know where Zarahemla is from the revelation we just saw. The plains of the Nephites are right here from Joseph Smith. The Rocky Mountains are, of course, over here. The sea east, which Joseph Smith said was here. The New Jerusalem, which is right here. Adam-on-Diamond, which we know where that is. The first missionaries, which were sent here, here, and here. And haplogroup X DNA just happens to be right in this area, and the promised land is the United States of America. So this has become the proposed North American setting for the Book of Mormon, right in this general area. Now this next section, I call it tents, temples, and teepees. Now you've gotten through the hard part. Okay, this is forming the foundation. Now we're going to build on this foundation a little bit and see where it goes, because it's so beautiful, brothers and sisters. When you place things in the right place, all of a sudden it's kind of like when you have a puzzle and you get the outer edges done, everything else just starts to make sense, and it becomes actually almost easier and easier as you fill it in. That is the feeling that I got in doing this research. As once it was established by Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon itself, everything else just started to fill in. Now, one thing that you need to also know is probably about a year or so ago that I had this overwhelming feeling that, in order to do this project, you're going to have to take every single city and land in the Book of Mormon, put it into a chart, into a table, and then, so this is what this is right here, is actually, it's multiple pages here. The first page is actually Zarahemla, okay? And what I have on here is I recorded the first actual recorded appearance and the date, the last time it was ever mentioned and the date, and then whether it was whether it had been destroyed or been rebuilt, any cities in the general area, and anything that was either north, south, east, or west oriented to that city. It took over 6 months to put this together. I was going, why do I have to do this? And it didn't become clear until after it was done. And quite a bit of what you're going to be seeing here next is as a result of that research. One of the things that came up was, and this is critical, the Book of Mormon people used tents. From the very beginning, when Lehi left Jerusalem, he says they took nothing with them except for his family's provisions and his tents. Now, it didn't say, and I had to go build some tents or make some tents. They had tents. He didn't have to go do that. Why is that? Why are tents important? What's that? For protection. Okay, how is a tent more protective than a regular house? Because if you need to get away, in other words, they didn't know about that at that time if the Assyrians or the Babylonians or somebody were going to come to call, and they might have to leave their permanent structures, and they don't want to be out in the desert with nothing. So ancient peoples almost always had tents as a survival strategy. So here's 124 BC. They pitched their tents round about the temple, every man having his tent with the door thereof. Everybody remembers that, right? King Benjamin. Okay. Well, what does that tell you? He said, every man having his tent with the door thereof towards the temple. What did every man have? A tent. Okay. Everybody must have had a tent if they had them all pointed towards the temple. This is also very interesting. This is 90 years before Christ. Now, the more idle part of the Lamanites lived in the wilderness, and they dwelt in tents. As far as we know, the Lamanites didn't build really many cities. They took over some Nephite cities, but they didn't do much in the way of city building. There's a reason for that, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Like I said, when you understand the right place, everything starts to make sense. Okay? So the Lamanites dwelt in tents. Now, I'll give you a little hint. It could be that the Lamanites dwelt in tents because in that way they could stay with their food supply. I'll get to that in a minute. The very end, 385 AD, just prior to the extermination of the Nephites. He said, we did march forth to the land of Cumorah. We did pitch our tents round about the hill Cumorah. And even the Jaredites had the same kind of thing. So they all had tents. Tents have been used continuously for millennia. And as evidence of that, this is our Boy Scout camp. They're still being used. Okay. Now, another thing that's very interesting, the first temple, you realize that was actually a tent. Now, who gave the dimensions and so forth for the temple? Where did that come from? Came from the Lord, and he gave it to who? To Moses. That's right. And he was very specific about it. He said, okay, you build it this many cubits by this many, and you use these kind of materials and so forth. All right? This is what they believe that the original tabernacle looked like. It was a rectangular structure. It had an area in the front for doing sacrifices, okay, and then it had this area in the back for doing ordnance work, right? Ancient temples, okay, the ancient Israelite temples like Solomon's temple had an outer barrier with screening, and because they were sacred ordinances that were being performed and they were to be kept from public view. Now, this is actually, they rebuilt this to kind of give you an idea. This is Solomon's temple. This is a model of Solomon's temple. Why is this important? Because Nephi specifically says that he built, it said, I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon. So it's important that we know, what did Solomon's temple look like? What was it built from? Now, he goes on to say, except for we didn't have some of the different natural raw materials to build it from. So I get the impression from this that he built it architecturally similar to the Solomon's temple. This is the Chichen Itza ruins in Mayan civilization, Mexico. This is a proposed Nephite temple by Mesoamerican theorists. Now, when I say that, I have to be careful because there are many of the Mesoamerican theorists who are quite clear, and they say no, these are not. These were actually these date to about 900 years AD, so they would not be Nephite temples. The reason why I left this in here is for one simple reason, though, and that is because this is the poster child of the Book of Mormon. When you see the Testaments, when you see other things, when they say Book of Mormon lands, it's one of those that is on the cover. Believe me. Okay? So that's why this is fair game, okay, to be able to discuss this. Is this like unto Solomon's temple, as as Nephi himself said? Well, there's the two of them side by side. Solomon's temple, low rectangular structure with a small integral courtyard. Mayan temples were pyramid-shaped structures with huge sports arenas and burial chambers for royalty. Are these likened to Solomon's temple? What purposes did the Mayan temples serve? Well, according to archaeologists, one of the things is they had this game that they liked to play that was kind of interesting because the losing team often were ceremonially executed. Here's some of the ball courts that are associated with these ruins. They also had astronomical observatories associated with these ruins. This is something that I think is just critical. What this is a ceramic. This is a rollout. Then what happened was when they opened up one of these pyramids structures, they find tombs in them. In fact, 20 out of 20 of the pyramids that I did research on, every one of them have dead people in them. Okay. This is a vase or a vase that was taken photographs of from all four sides, then seen together so that it's in now what they call a photographic rollout. This came from a burial chamber inside of a pyramid. And this is what it's depicting. This is what these people were doing that had this. You see this guy? He's stretched out over an altar, and he's being eviscerated. And the priests are all dancing around here. The Mayans were into human sacrifice. This is another one, same kind of thing, photographic rollout from this vase from Wesleyan University. This guy's got his leg up, which means he's still alive. Priests are dancing around. If you can see this, there's behind here, there's a big stone stela over this altar in this that was on this vase. This is that altar today. This is my Copan ritual stela altar today. Right there was the site of human sacrifices. Now, it does say in the Book of Mormon that the Lamanites also got into doing human sacrifices as well. Okay, but the idea is that we need to take a much harder look at using these structures as the poster child of the Book of Mormon, because they are not related to the Nephites at all. Now, when I say that, I say that kind of boldly, but as we continue to go through, hopefully you'll see that there's, that the evidence just keeps building. So archaeologically, they say that the temple actually isn't this structure down here. The temple is actually this portion up here, because this area down here is actually burial chamber area. Now, Solomon's temple had that wall around it so that people couldn't see the ordinances that were going on. These temples were placed up high so that people could see the ordinances that were going on, because these ordinances were ones of power and dominion and authority to subject the people, not to liberate them. So the question is this Nephite? Well, again, Solomon's temple was divided into this open courtyard, offset with a rectangular structure. Mayan temples had pyramid-shaped, elevated human sacrifice ritual areas, and they were square instead of rectangular, as God told Moses. In fact, here's a C note. This is next to Chichen Itza, and it's full of sacrificed victims that were thrown in there. It's in a karst area, limestone area. Why would there be a need for multiple temples for doing ordinance work and performing animal sacrifices, which they would have been doing? Well, there's temple after temple after temple here. And then this one I love this. 1 Nephi chapter 12. Now, this is something that Nephi wrote down, that all of the Nephites after that would have had at least access potentially to that record. And in that record, he's talking about in his dream, he said that he saw a large and spacious building, which thy father saw is vain imaginations and the pride of the children of men. Would righteous Nephites have built such structures? Okay, well, what about the evidence such as the feathered serpent and Quetzalcoatl and the great white god and so forth that other lands have that indicate that they saw Christ? You know, because those people, the Mayans, had these traditions. There's no question that they did. Well, you know what? The Book of Mormon even has an answer to this. Okay? It says, 3 Nephi, verily, verily I say unto you, that I have other sheep, which are not of this land, neither of the land of Jerusalem. You see, he just left Jerusalem. Now he came and visited the Nephites. And now what's he saying? He's going to go to other lands as well. Probably many other lands. Okay, that's why we have similar records for the Chinese, and even I understand that the Japanese have records of a great white god coming to visit them. My personal thought and belief is that Christ did visit the Mayans. He was probably there. But that does not make them Nephites. Okay? He said he had other sheep. He goes on, he says, but I have received a commandment from the Father that I shall go unto them, and that they shall hear my voice, and shall be numbered among my sheep, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Therefore I go to show myself unto them. Anybody interested to see temple mound sites in North America? Have you heard of them before? Okay. Well, let's take a look at a couple of them here. This is actually a mural that is on a wall in the Hopewell Museum in Missouri. Now, a couple of quick things about this. This particular temple mound has 3 levels. And they know from post molds, which is where they take whenever people would take a log or a piece of wood and put it in the ground, once it decays, it leaves a carbon signature there that can be then traced. And they can know actually about how big around the log was, how far down in the ground it was buried, etc., from archaeological findings. And what they found was that this had a low wall around the sides. It was flat on the top, unlike the burial mounds, which were all just humped up into a point kind of at the top. That's what separates some of the temple mounds from the burial mounds of the Hopewell people. And it had this low wall around it, but they can't figure out exactly why, but the building that was on top of it wasn't set in the middle. It was offset to one side with kind of just an empty space in the front. Is that more like unto Solomon's temple? Well, now a couple of things. This particular one is Cahokia, and this particular temple does not date archaeologically exactly to the Nephite time frame, but I'm using this as an example of some of the things that were happening over here in the Americas. This is actually, you can see the mural. This is inside the museum here. Okay, so you can see this. Here's the temple up here. There's all these people that had this wall going around it. This is what they think it would have looked like back in the day. Again, low wall, and the structure is offset to one side. This is, by the way, this particular one, from this point to this point, compared to the tower, to the Pyramid of Giza. Okay? And this is Chichen Itza, and this is the Pyramid of the Sun. This structure, from this point to this point, makes it the largest temple structure on the planet. Missouri, USA. That's it today. That's a person standing upon it right now. That's after 2,000 years of erosion. This is from the top of it. You can actually see St. Louis right there. You can see the arch right there. Okay. Are there any indications of climate in the Book of Mormon? Because this is probably the biggest question that I get all the time is, okay, if the Book of Mormon happened in North America, they certainly would have mentioned snow. Okay. Well, I did a little bit of research about that. Well, first off, before we get to the snow question, very interesting because this is the natural route. This is from NASA. If they left here in Saudi Arabia and went into the Great Deep here, the natural currents would have taken them around Cape Horn of Africa, up through the Atlantic, over to this, and then ended up over here, somewhere either on the eastern coast or up into the Gulf of Mexico. The ocean currents basically go counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere and clockwise in the northern hemisphere. So again, if they left from here, came down and picked up this one, they would come down over here and then picked up this one and up into this area. These are the oceanic currents, and again, showing how it comes down through here and up through here. Most of us understand when they get into the Atlantic, because of hurricanes, we've all seen enough of this with Florida having its problems and Louisiana and so forth. We understand that they can blow in either here or hit the east coast. But that's the natural wind pattern. So if you were in a sailing ship, where would you probably end up? Well, probably along the same lines as Columbus did. See, he did this route from here and took it around here and came up, and his first stop, actually, I understand, was Cuba. But then he brought the Pilgrims up a little bit further north. That was the route that they would come. Okay, so in Alma 46, it does say a couple things about weather. It says that they had seasons. Now, are there seasons in Guatemala? Well, you do have two seasons. You have hot and, oh my gosh, it's really hot. Okay, that's the two seasons that you typically have. Now, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because there is a mountain range that goes through there, and it does snow and hail and so forth on those mountains. But this is not where the Book of Mormon was supposed to have taken place. That's all been placed down in the jungle areas. Okay, so this is by nature of the climate. They had seasons. These are the two times in the Book of Mormon where it does mention frozen water. One was in snow, and the other one is in the form of hail. Now, in the snow one, this is actually from the dream. So it's not actually talking about snow. Let me just ask you, does it snow in Jerusalem? Yes, it does. It actually does snow in Jerusalem. I've seen photographs of it. Okay, so Lehi would have been at least somewhat familiar with what snow was and the whiteness of it. And then he said that they exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. Well, it kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense that he would have put that in there if he saw all this in advance, right, in his vision. He saw what was going to happen to his posterity. Would it have made much sense for him to use snow as a information or as a descriptive term, if you will, if he knew that his posterity really was never going to know what snow was? Doesn't make a lot of sense that way. But it doesn't really prove anything conclusively either way. It does mention hail, okay, whirlwind, yen is hail, and is mighty storm, and so forth. And it does hail there in Guatemala as well. One question I have, people say, well, how could people survive in tents and so forth, up in the northern countries? Well, they weren't having too many problems when Columbus pulled up. And they go, hey, how's it going? They were all out there. They weren't having any problems living in New York and so forth, in the snow, in their tents and teepees. So, yes, people can survive living in the winter. In fact, as absolute evidence, these Indians lived in Montana. Okay, and it really gets cold there. So then, I've had people ask me that question, what about snow? But, I've never had anybody ask me, well, what about heat? If it happened down in Guatemala, wouldn't they have mentioned something about heat? Well, it turns out that there's twice as many references to snow as there is about heat. There's only one time in the Book of Mormon when it specifically mentions heat. In Alma 51 it says that they had been fighting all day long and the sleep had overpowered the day. To me, it actually makes more sense that it was in a temperate climate, because when you come out of the springtime, and the first couple of times that you go out and do work in your garden or whatever, it seems a lot hotter. You know, when I lived in Arizona for several years, after a few years, 115 wasn't a big deal. Go play golf, it's great. 115 degrees. Now, this is the only reference in the Book of Mormon indicating a warm climate. It appears that the weather was simply not worthy of the limited writing space on the plates. Not important. But are there any other indications of climate? See, weather is one thing, climate's another. Are there any indications of that? Well, there are a couple of things. Here in Helaman it says, it came to pass as timber was exceedingly scarce in the land northward, they did send forth much by the way of shipping. That tells us two things. Number one, is wherever they were at, they were using ships, and they were shipping, which means that they had to have been using some kind of waterways. It also says that timber is exceedingly scarce. Well, how could there have been a lack of timber in a tropical rainforest? How are you going to run out of timber? They've been doing this now, slash and burn stuff, for years. In fact, that's one of the things that Mr. Gore has been so concerned about. But even so, it's still taken all these people, all these many years, and it just grows up so fast again, because the trees they grow continuously year round. I don't see how this can work in a tropical rainforest, which, of course, this area is. Now, Mayan temples are located in these tropical rainforests, so could they have been Nephite temples? Well, in opposition to that, if you will, Missouri, on the other hand, how long does it take a tree to grow to maturity in Missouri? Well, it takes about 60 to 70 years. Okay? Why is that? Because the temperate climate makes it so that trees are dormant half the time. So they only grow a little bit at a time. So it makes more sense if it was in a northern climate. There's also things in the Book of Mormon, in 3rd Nephi. It talks about that there was a tempest and whirlwinds and thunderings and lightnings and so forth. Well, what's a tempest and what is a whirlwind? Well, I think a whirlwind is pretty clear what that is. A tornado. And I think this is very interesting. It says that there were some people who were actually carried away in the whirlwind. Well, see, that's what differentiates a tempest, which I believe to be a hurricane, from a tornado. Because, see, in a hurricane, it'll blow you to something, but when you eventually hit something that's stationary, and that'll stop you. As far as I know, it's the only weather phenomena that can literally take a person and they're just gone. So that brought me to the next question. Where do tornadoes occur? So in doing my research there, world tornadoes in agricultural areas. This is from ThinkQuest here. Tornadoes from 1930 on. It turns out that tornadoes don't occur in equatorial regions at all, because the conditions necessary for their very formation are absent. Not there. You notice right here, Central America, the location where the Book of Mormon was supposed to have happened, has never had a single recorded tornado. Whereas up here in North America, in our proposed Book of Mormon lands, this is Tornado Alley. Okay? The highest concentration of tornadoes anywhere on the planet happened there. So is it any wonder that the Book of Mormon people might have mentioned that? Now this next part, I just love this. I literally felt like I was being directly guided in this particular portion. And this question sounds absolutely preposterous. Could the American buffalo or bison witness to the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon? How many of you have ever thought of that? Oh yeah, the buffalo. Okay, well here's the buffalo. Now this is my rendition. This is actually in Yellowstone, but this is, imagine these are the buffalo out on the plains. Well, the source is actually from American Bison, A Natural History, 2002 book. And I was thumbing through this book, literally it was in BYU library. I was walking down, I was doing a little bit of research on this for a couple different reasons. And I said, pick up this book, and so I picked it up and I started thumbing through it, and I saw this map. And I looked at that and I was going, okay, I read this range. This area right here is the range that is densely occupied by buffalo during periods of typical climate. This area over here is range sparsely occupied during periods of typical climate. And I was looking at that and going, wow, look at the differentiation between those two. What is causing such a dramatic difference between the two? And then I got reading and I find out, well, what is that line going up here? It's the Mississippi River. And I thought, well, maybe buffalo can't swim. Maybe that's the problem. Well, it turns out that buffalo can swim. They're actually quite good swimmers. But they won't swim if they can't clearly see the other side. And so when they get their heads down low, like a buffalo is, this is the Mississippi River at Nauvoo. That's a long swim. And the buffalo wouldn't cross there. In fact, there's a county up in Wisconsin called Buffalo County. It's right on the Mississippi River. And it's called that because back in the day, when there were millions of buffalo, and we'll get to that here in just a second, this is where they would cross, way up north, up in Wisconsin. That's where they would cross the river. They didn't cross down below. And that brought me to a couple of scriptures. In Amos 22:31, it says, "Thus the land on the northward was called desolation, the land on the south was bountiful, it being the wilderness which is filled with all manner of wild beasts of every kind, a part of which had come from the land northward, looking for food." And then here in Ether it says, "It came to pass that the people did follow the course of the beasts, and did devour the carcasses of them which fell by the way." What are these beasts doing?
Migrating. Food.
They're migrating. That's right. Now, if these are beasts that are migrating, then the question became, okay, so are there any beasts that migrate in Central America? Because the Book of Mormon is saying that there's these beasts and that they're migrating from the land northward looking for food. Well, it turns out that I couldn't think of any beasts, number one, and I couldn't find any information about any beasts that were migrating, number two. So I decided I would go to the experts. So I actually emailed Dr. Klaus Reed. He has the Global Registry of Migratory Species. And I emailed him, this is my question. "Hello, Klaus. I'm a researcher working on a natural science book. We simply need to verify if there are any large migratory terrestrial mammalia anywhere in Central America, including Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, etc. I'm not aware of any, but just wanted to verify." He emailed me back, 6/18/07, "Hello, Rod. Indeed, not to my knowledge." Now he goes on to say, number one, there's really no beasts, because the biggest animal down there, I think they call it a tapir or a tapir. And it's kind of like a large pig, okay? Then he was a little kind of condescending, and he said, "You're a researcher, you should know these things. There's only one reason why animals migrate, because of changing seasons. They migrate because they're going from one place that has food to places that don't. That's why in the Serengeti, the animals migrate. It's seasonal. That means that wherever the Book of Mormon happened, there was seasons. And only in North America is there a qualifying animal as a beast that wanders up and down. But they're primarily on the western side of the Mississippi River. Now, it turns out in that book that I just showed you, there were 60 million buffalo. This is approximately 60 million buffalo were slaughtered on the plains. Okay? How much evidence from their remains should we expect to find? How much evidence from remains should we expect to find of Book of Mormon war dead? In other words, here at the final battle at Cumorah, it says when you add them all up, at least 230,000 Nephites were involved in that battle. And he says they had fallen, their flesh and their bones and blood lay upon the face of the earth, being left by the hands of those who slew them to molder upon the land and to crumble to return to their mother earth. There were 60 million buffalo, and a buffalo averaged about 1,600 pounds compared to an average 200-pound human. How many buffalo do we still find out there? How much of their remains are there? You see, if they're not buried, if they're just left on the plains like these people were, according to the Book of Mormon, they just disintegrate and they're gone. No record. Okay, so only the ones that were buried are going to be the ones that you're going to be able to find. So, the idea of finding massive amounts of people at the Hill Cumorah and finding their bones and so forth is really kind of ludicrous. It's not going to happen. If they were left out there on the plains, on the valleys, they would have just disintegrated just like the big 1,600-pound buffalo did. 60 million of them are just disappeared. They're gone. So now this brings me to this, again, back to this paper. When I did this, a couple things that are cool about being able to do this is that you can actually sort things. So nice to have computers. Okay. So you can sort things in different ways. Well, one of the ways I sorted this was by the first time it was that an area was mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Well, it turns out, and I had no idea about this, how many of you knew that for the first 400 years of the Book of Mormon, there were only 2 cities even mentioned? I had no idea about that. That's what this is. It was Nephi and Zarahemla. They're the only ones even mentioned. Right here, just a little bit, about 187 BC, 200 BC, before Christ, there were these few cities here, including Mormon that was mentioned. But then, all of these, Bountiful, Desolation, there's Sidon River, Sea East, Sea West, Madonai, all of these different cities, these all showed up right at about 100 years before Christ. This means that the population was kind of going along, and then all of a sudden it reached a kind of a critical mass, and then it started to grow exponentially. And as it was growing, this is what caused the primary Nephite expansion on the Promised Land. And that primary Nephite expansion began at 100 years before Christ and ended at 400 years after Christ. Now, how well does that match with the Hopewell people timeline, where it says 100 years before Christ to 400 AD? See, now all of a sudden it makes sense, because they were so small of a population that they hadn't really been able to make much of an impact on the other Asian population that were here. But now all of a sudden they became much bigger. And now you can also see for the first time why starting from a firm foundation is absolutely critical to doing proper research. The very first time that the narrow neck of land was even mentioned wasn't until 90 years before Christ. For 500 years, it was not even mentioned, which means it was not the primary thing that we should be looking for. It's not the main geographical feature of the Book of Mormon. That make sense? Okay? So, that's the first time it was mentioned. The narrow neck and narrow pass weren't mentioned clear until that point in time. So again, the main Nephite expansion 100 BC to 400 AD. Now, this book was written in 1851 by E.G. Squire. He was commissioned, actually, by the Smithsonian Institute to go and to survey all of these mounds back east, because they were being torn down in a massive fashion. The settlers were moving out. They're kind of a pain to have in the middle of your field, this big mound. And the other big thing is that occasionally people would find kind of cool artifacts in the mounds, and so they wanted to find out what was in them, so they would tear them down to find out. And so they were being destroyed extremely rapidly, and they knew that there wasn't going to be long before they were going to be gone. And so they sent out E.G. Squire, and he went out and for several years went out and surveyed the mounds. This specifically is Antiquities of the State of New York, okay, where the Hill Cumorah is located. Now, in the book, it says Hopewell 100 years before Christ to AD 400 was the Hopewell culture in Ohio. Again, this map talks about it 100 BC to 400 AD. Let's talk just very briefly about Nephite defense systems, because wherever this Book of Mormon geography is, wherever it actually happened, it has to match with the Book of Mormon. Wouldn't you agree? Of course. Okay. So, Alma 48 says that they threw up banks of earth round about to enclose their armies, and also walls of stone. And the highness of the bank which had been thrown up in the depth of the ditch which had been dug round about. So what they did was they would dig a ditch, they would put the dirt up onto kind of next to it, and then they did what? Then they implanted poles on top of that and created a breastwork of timbers. And we'll get to that here in just a second. So is there any evidence of this in the Book of Mormon? Well, here's E.G. Squire. In his book, he has literally hundreds and hundreds of drawings just like that, of all kinds of these enclosures and mounds and burial mounds and temple mounds. And the vast majority of them, they have this white boundary is an interior earth bank. The black boundary is a ditch. And you can see on almost every one, this is ancient work in Jefferson County, New York. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of these that they did, or actually tens of thousands. Now this one is kind of interesting. Once you take a look at that, it's kind of got an octagonal kind of shape with a circle on it. This is what he did back in 1851. This is today. This still exists. This is one of the mounds right here. It's actually a golf course now. Okay? That's what it looked like from the air not too many years ago. So you can see it's actually still there. They're amazed at the ingenuity and how sophisticated these people were to be able to get these huge things and nearly perfectly level and nearly perfectly round. This is one of the ditches. This is Fort Ancient. This is the lay of the land. There's this ditch and then this mound. Now, just for a second, put yourself in the place of a Lamanite attacking a Nephite city. On top of this, I love this because this has this tree here. Now the tree is probably about 35 or so feet tall. According to the post molds in the top of these things, they think that the trees would have been about 20 to 25 feet tall. So not quite as tall as this tree. So you'd have a structure going along the top surface of this about that tall up here. Okay? Look at how deep this ditch is. This is after 2,000 years of erosion. Okay? Can you imagine how incredibly ferocious some of these battles must have been when in the Book of Mormon it testifies that the Lamanites attacked and attacked and attacked to the point that some of these ditches began to be filled with their dead and dying bodies. See, brothers and sisters, this is not a nice nursery story. This is a real history of real people, and things really happened. And these people actually lived and died in these areas. This is very interesting. This is also in the Squire and Davies maps. This particular city, it doesn't look like anything like any of the other cities, any of the other enclosures that they did. There's actually 4 different maps that survived, and in 1936, I believe it was, the United States government sent out, I believe it was like the Corps of Engineers, and they leveled this site. It has completely been destroyed. But there's still these 4 maps that are part of it. And when you orient the map a particular direction, you see anything interesting on this? These were huge earth banks. Okay? Anything? What does this look like?
Menorah.
Doesn't that look like a menorah? Yeah. Okay, what about this up here? What does this look like?
Lantern.
A lantern, but what kind of a lantern? Does it look anything? What's that? It looks like an oil lamp. Yeah. It actually looks like a Jewish or Hebrew oil lamp. And these are the places of entrance. By the way, archaeologically, they believe that all of these cities were defensive in nature. Whoever these people were, they weren't aggressive. They were trying to defend themselves. Now, a couple of other things that I noticed. Anybody see this? Or that?
Square.
Yeah, very interesting. That there are some things like that. That this is, again, another place of entrance here. I find this to be, well, this is Alma 50. And they also began in that same year to build many cities on the north, one in a particular manner, which they called Lehi, which was in the north by the borders of the seashore. Just so happened that this was in Ohio, about 90 miles off of the shore of Lake Erie. All right, let's continue to talk about Nephite defense systems. This is from Alma 50. It says that they dug up these heaps of earth. They put timbers up to the height of a man. They erected towers between these areas of the timbers, and then they were round about every city and all the land. So, is there any evidence of this in the Nephite in our proposed Book of Mormon lands? Well, this is actually the Hopewell Museum. This is what they think that these walls would have been like, based on the post molds that they found. They think it would have been about that tall. They also believe that they would have been covered with some kind of a material, maybe mud of some type. Let me ask you, why would people cover these walls with mud?
Fire.
Okay? Yeah, when you think about it, how vulnerable is this to fire? Now, we obviously know that these people must have known, how to build fire. Well, this is from the mural. This is what it shows. It shows this structure, this breastwork of timbers with towers every so often around about the cities. In fact, in this particular one, the stockade wall, this is obviously a sign there. They used 15,000 to 20,000 posts, mostly oak and hickory. Now, oak and hickory grow even slower. Okay, those are very hardwoods. And they used 15 to 20,000 posts just for this one stockade. Is it any wonder that they were running out of trees, which we'll get to here in just a second? Which then brought me to the next question. What was the primary building material used in the Book of Mormon? Because you see that the cities down in Central America are primarily made out of what? Stone. Okay. Well, what was the primary Book of Mormon material? The primary material was wood. Now, clear back in 569 before Christ, 2nd Nephi says, and he taught his people to build in all manner of wood. And then in Helaman 3, this is towards the end of the Book of Mormon. This is 46 years before Christ. I just love this scripture. It is fantastic. It says, and the people who were in the land northward did dwell in tents. So we know that already. We've established that they lived in tents, okay, and in houses of cement. Now, is cement the same as stone? Is it? No, it's not. Cement, it has to be mixed and so forth. Stone is hewn. It's a whole different kind of thing. And they did suffer whatsoever tree should spring up upon the face of the land, that it should grow up, that in time they might have timber to build what? Their houses, their cities, their temples, and their synagogues, and their sanctuaries, and all manner of buildings. It is extremely clear from this scripture that they used wood. And if we're looking for temples made out of stone, then we're looking for the wrong kind of temples, because these temples were made from timber. Okay? then the thought was, well, what was the most dramatic example you can think of in the Book of Mormon for a big structure like these, pyramids and so forth down in Central America? Who can think of the kind of what the biggest structure you can think of would be?
King Noah.
All right, King Noah. All right, King Noah. That's what I came up with that as well. He said, Mosiah, this is Mosiah 11, 8 through 10. He said that he built many elegant and spacious buildings, and he ornamented them with fine work of wood. Now that says he ornamented them that way. But he says that he also built him a spacious palace. Now, this is the only time I can think of in the Book of Mormon where it specifically mentions a palace, a big building. Okay? He says it had a throne in the midst thereof, all of which was of fine wood. So the biggest structure mentioned in the Book of Mormon is not stone. It is wood. So then I asked my question, well, what about stone then? Does it mention stone as a building material? Well, it turns out that yes, it does. Actually, it talks about stone as a building material. Right here in Alma 48, it says that they also built walls out of stone. It never says that they built homes or any temples or any other kinds of structures out of stone. They were all built out of wood. They had some walls that were made out of stone, and it's sure enough, you look at Hopewell Ruins, USA, this is called the Wall of the Warriors. It's an ancient stone wall, right where Joseph Smith said it would be. Hopewell dwellings. This is the post molds from a Hopewell dwelling. This is what they think it might have looked like. This is what they built to kind of make it look like that. Again, I think they would have had this mud on the outside and so forth. Now, we already kind of covered this a little bit, but if this was a Nephite city made out of wood, what would be the easiest way to destroy it? Fire. All right, exactly, fire. So are there any indications in the Book of Mormon itself for cities being burned with fire? And sure enough, there are. Okay. 3 Nephi 8. And many great notable cities were sunk, and many were burned. And these cities, Jacobah, I have caused to be burned with fire. And also the city of Laman, and Josh, and Gad, and Kishkumen. They were all burned with fire. What about in Ether and the Jaredites? Sure enough, he says, now they did slay both the women and children. They did burn the cities. These were not stone cities. These had to have been wooden cities. And then finally, the final destruction of the Nephites in Mormon 5:5. And it came to pass that whatsoever lands we had passed by, and the inhabitants thereof were not gathered in, were destroyed by the Lamanites, and their towns and their villages and their cities were all burned with fire. Brothers and sisters, we should be looking for towns and cities made out of wood, according to the Book of Mormon. Now, this is one that's very interesting. People ask me all the time, well, what about the time of Christ? What would have caused all this, the upheaval and so forth? It says that the entire face of the land was changed at that point in time. Well, a couple of things about that. First off, we know from geological records that the ocean shorelines on the Atlantic and Pacific have not changed in the last 2,000 years. Those have remained steady. So at the time of Christ, I don't believe that continents were moved. What we're talking about is a change on the face of the land. Okay, and there are no really volcanoes or anything in this area, and so the thought was, well, what would have happened? Well, it turns out that there's actually a show. It's on the History Channel that is called "Earthquake in the Heartland." And it talks about the New Madrid fault system. Anybody heard of that? Know what I'm talking about? Okay, well, this is very unique because it's intraplate. It's in the middle of the North American craton. And it falls right in here. Now, here in California, they had a 6.7 magnitude quake. This is where it was felt. This one, in 1895, they had a magnitude 6.8 quake, and it was felt here. This is probably the most volatile area as far as severe destruction of the United States is if this goes, and they think that it might any time. Okay, but in 1811 and 1812 were two other massive things. When that happened, it had these massive sand blows and so forth. On this show, the lady says, oh yeah, and there's this one layer here, and it's about 35 or 40 feet high, and that one was about 2,000 years ago. When it talks about cities being buried and so forth, this is, I think, a place that we need to take a good, hard look at and find out how close some of those things were to the time of Christ. Now, these are some of the, these are enclosures. Every one of those dots is an Indian enclosure from these Hopewell people. This is one of the oldest photographs of the mounds out there. This is another old photograph of one of the mounds. This is one of the mounds today, actually last year. This was the tearing down of the mounds. People were very interested in what was inside of them, and they just tear them down, and then, of course, they wouldn't rebuild them because there's nothing much left. This is Moundville, okay? This is what it looks like today. These are some of the only still remaining mounds. Now, there still are a lot of mounds out there, but these are the ones that have been preserved. Now, this map is also from that. This is from Mark Zeman in the Indiana Historical Society. The Hopewell Interaction Sphere is the name of the book. And what it shows, this is the distribution of Hopewell mortuary sites in this analysis. And as you can see, they were highly clustered around rivers. Why would ancient people live next to rivers? Water. Exactly. Okay? They need to have a clean supply of water. You can't stay healthy and not have water. This is a different map. Now, every one of the red dots here is the other one. This one here was actually just mortuary sites. This one was any kind of enclosure, or there's a lot of different criterion that goes into that. But look at that. I mean, it's just, they just literally lined the rivers. This is adapted from Mound Builders and Cliff Dwellers, which is a Time Life book, 1992. This is the Adena people. The Hopewell people are the red squares, and the green squares here are the Ohio Hopewell. And again, you can see them combined along rivers, except for in this one area up here in the Ohio River Valley. They are not as condensed along the rivers. They're more in the valley. Now, this is a map from the Hopewell Interaction Sphere, and this that shows three primary areas where there's a high concentration of the Hopewell mound building people. One is right here next to Nauvoo. One is right here in the Ohio River Valley. This is also the Mississippi River Valley here. And then this is actually at the southern end of the Appalachians, and then down here in Florida. This is, I put these maps over the top of the topographic map so you can see where they're at. Okay, so this is that map. Now, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into things, but this is going back to the DNA for just a second. Because in this article, American Journal of Physical Anthropology 2005, this article is titled, "The Rapid Deployment of the 5 Founding Amerind Mitochondrial DNA Haplogroups via Coastal and Riverine Colonization." Now, I know that's a mouthful, okay? but basically, what they're saying is that Haplogroup X colonization spread up the Mississippi River. They started from here at this amount of X, and they ended up here at this amount of X. There's every indication that whoever these Hopewell mound building people were, they started from down here and moved up there. So let's talk about North American cultural ruins. Things like copper plates and arrowheads and copper implements and war implements and so forth. This is from Journal of Scientific Exploration, 2003 article. 2,000 years ago, Hopewell culture and nobility in southern Ohio were entombed with imported obsidian. Now, these are what they found in the mounds. So this is not an opinion. This is that they actually found when they excavate these mounds. One of the things that they find, Southern Ohio was entombed with imported obsidian from Yellowstone Park, Wyoming. Just like Joseph said, right? Rocky Mountains formed the western boundary. Conch shells from the Gulf of Mexico forming the southern boundary. Mica from the Appalachians forming the eastern boundary. And copper from the western Great Lakes forming the northern boundary. Okay, that was the boundaries of the Hopewell people. Now, in this, it also says, this is the occurrence of interaction sphere artifacts from the Hopewell mortuary sites. Things like breastplates, head plates. Anybody heard of those in the Book of Mormon? Of course. Anybody interested in seeing a head plate and a breastplate? There's one right there. This is from Mound Builders, 1936 book. There's a copper head plate. There's another one right there on the head. Now they think that these would have, this is from Ohio, the Hopewell Interaction Sphere again, 1979 book. They even call it a head plate. This is copper that comes from Michigan. It would be held in a leather, kind of a cap, they think, and then tied maybe underneath the chin or something like that. Sometimes they got a little bit more ornamental as well, like this one, which was actually in that 1851 book when they were excavating the mounds. This is what they found. Now this one here, this is the head plate, and then these two they think would have come down along the cheeks and protected the jawline from battle. Things like, here's the frequency of sites in this region yielding artifact classes, breastplates and head plates. I mean, there's a breastplate. Other items that they had, that's a copper breastplate. Now, the copper is very interesting because you see, there's only a few places on the earth where native copper exists. Now, over here in Salt Lake City, where Kennecott Copper is, the largest pit mine in the world, that has no native copper. All that copper has to be smelted out. When I say native copper, I mean it's just copper that's on the ground. And it just so happens that one of the biggest repositories of geologic native copper is right there in the Keweenaw Peninsula in Michigan. And that's where these copper implements come from. There's another breastplate. Now this one has shells on it, shell beads. It came from the Gulf of Mexico. This is the area up there in New York is just literally littered with war implements. In fact, some of the earliest settlers there said that they couldn't walk on the ground without stepping on war implements, meaning arrowheads and so forth. They were so thick and prevalent. This is just one little stash, one little cache here. 243 blades right there. Occurrence of major interaction sphere raw materials. The Hopewell people had copper, silver, and iron, just like the Book of Mormon says. Here's some copper that's from that area. That's a big, huge piece of native copper. This is 2 pieces of copper that I actually own, and that little bit right there, that's silver. Because you see, copper, silver, and gold are all typically found together. In fact, the Kennecott Copper Mine produces one of its primary money makers is gold that they get from that mine. And they get a lot of silver and then again mostly copper. So wherever you find copper, you're going to find silver and gold typically. There's Kennecott Copper as an idea of how big that mine is. Now, this has got all these different artifacts, copper artifacts, arrowheads, stones. These are copper pieces that came out of mounds. This is a 13-pound hammer, okay? But it's different than most hammers because they thought that originally, because it has a kind of a point to it, they originally were thinking that this might have been for chopping down trees, because obviously if you're going to chop down 20,000 oak trees to make a stockade, you're going to need something relatively hard to do that with. But it turns out that this stone is way too soft for chopping. This stone has one purpose, and that's for breaking heads. But 13 pounds would have taken a big man to wield this thing. All right. So are there any indications of massive burials in back east? Well, This is from this book, 1851. He says, the bone pits, which occur in some parts of western New York, Canada, Michigan, etc., have unquestionably a corresponding origin. They are of various sizes, but usually contain a large number of skeletons. One of the pits discovered some years ago in the town of Cambria, Niagara County, was estimated to contain the bones of several thousand individuals. They go on to say, this is page 100, the area was a depository of the dead. It was a pit excavated to the depth of 4 or 5 feet, filled with human bones. Hundreds seem to have been thrown in promiscuously of both sexes and of all ages. Numerous barbs or arrow points were found among the bones and in the vicinity. How many of you have heard of these already? Probably nobody has. Who is telling this story? Who is bringing this out? Okay? Among them were a few fetal bones. Many of the skulls bore marks of violence, leading to the belief that they were broken before burial. Evidence of that 13-pound hammer. Okay? In excavating the canal through the bank, another burial place was disclosed, evidently more ancient, for the bones crumbled to pieces almost immediately upon exposure to the air. This is typical of very ancient things that have been buried. The exposure to the oxygen, they just crumble to dust. Okay, the number of skeletons are represented to have been countless. Does that sound anything like what the Book of Mormon says? Yes. Look at this. Hundreds of individuals thrown into this. And this is a burial mound, actually. Okay? All these different people. It's an archaeological site. This is church bifaces from this mound. Now, they think that these might have been a shovel or a hoe, because the mound builders were agrarian, just like the Book of Mormon said about the Nephites. Okay? So they found these, there was about 7,000 of them. Then there's things like this artifact, which was found. It has a menorah on it. How did these people know about that? These are some other things. I have taken this portion out of the presentation, but this is called the mystic symbol, and we're not going to discuss that, however. So, but there are some things, though, some criterion for determining whether an artifact is a fake, because I have actually removed from this presentation artifacts that are very amazing, that depict things like a person on a cross and so forth, that were found in different caves. But these artifacts have been declared as fakes and as hoaxes, and so we've taken them out to not be less controversial. But the important thing here is that none of them that I know of have gone through these 5 scientific steps for determining whether or not an artifact is a fraud or is real. And these are the 5 steps that should be taking place. Was a complete scientific study performed? Is the investigator qualified to do the study? Is the investigator biased or objective? And is the basis for a fake determination clearly stated in a written report? And was the report peer-reviewed? Those are the only things that need to be done. But these artifacts that have been declared as fakes have not gone through that process that I am aware of. Anyway, this is a map from the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. Again, this is that same map that we talked about before, but this is where we get into a little, this section is a little bit more speculative in nature. I do reserve the right to make changes without notice, okay? But I believe that this is going to give you some good outlines, some good guidelines to take a look at, because it matches up with the Revelations, with the Book of Mormon, with what Joseph Smith said, and the archaeological findings that we have. This is, I believe, the best. These are what I consider to be my picks, okay, for Book of Mormon lands. If they came here as the beginning, this would be the land of the first inheritance, then this would be Nephi, Zarahemla, and Bountiful. Those are the 3 primary cities of the Book of Mormon. Now, this is, again, this map that we saw before, that is now added to this map. then this is the third map is added. So now this is all three maps combined together, and as you can see, they're concentrated along riverways, and there's really three primary areas where these people were clustered together. This is in Ether, the Jaredites, and they built a great city by the narrow neck of land, by the place where the sea divides the land. Let me ask you, where in Central America is there a place where the sea divides the land? You see, the land divides the seas there. This is an area where the seas divide up the land. This is my pick for the land of first inheritance. Book of Mormon Geography, about 589 BC. This is when they first arrived. It came to pass after we had sailed for the space of many days, we arrived at the promised land. We pitched our tents, then we did call it the promised land. Now, all ancient people that I'm aware of used rivers to form the boundaries of their lands. That was true over in Israel, and it's true in most ancient cultures. Their lands would go up to a certain point where there was a river, and that formed the basis for the next person's land. Okay, and if that is the case here, then this makes a lot of sense, because then I believe that this would be the land of Nephi, following up on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, which in this particular case would be the Sidon River. And so this would be the land of Nephi. Now, a couple of things about that. Second Nephi, it says we to take our tents and whatsoever things were possible. This is when the Lamanites first started to persecute the Nephites. And Nephi decided, we have to leave because my brothers are going to kill us. And so they left. They traveled into the wilderness for the space of many days. And after we had journeyed for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents. And we did call it Nephi. Well, if they moved up the river and then into this area, this is the lower part of the Appalachian Mountains. That's a pretty area up there, and would have been an excellent location. Then in Omni is when the land of Nephi first shows up. It says that he made a king over the land of Zarahemla. Behold, he being warned of the Lord that he should flee out of the land of Nephi. Well, if you were going to leave the land of Nephi and the rivers form the borders, you would probably want to go on the other side of the river so that you're not infringing on their territory. Okay? Well, if they go across the other side of the river, this is a mountain range here. This is the Ozarks. Not a very hospitable place for people who are trying to do agricultural farming. So if they moved up this way, though, now they're in the Mississippi River Valley. That's some of the most fertile farmland on earth. It's right there. So if they moved up into that area, that could have, if that was the land of Nephi, then all of a sudden a lot of other things make sense. This is Alma 22. And also there were many Lamanites on the east by the seashore. Now this is 100 years before Christ. And the Lamanites had moved up and they had taken over the land of Nephi at this point in time. Okay, remember that? Anti-Nephi, Lehites, and so forth, they came from the land of Nephi. This is Lamanite territory in 100 BC. And also they were Lamanites in the east by the seashore over here, where the Lamanites had driven them, the Nephites had driven them, and thus the Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. Nevertheless, the Nephites had taken possession of all the northern parts of the land, because they started down here, so this would have been considered to be north up here, on the land bordering on the wilderness at the head of the river Sidon, which is up here, from the east to the west. So now they were stretched out east to west because the Lamanites had driven them up from the south. Okay, round about on the wilderness side on the north, even until they came to the land which they called Bountiful, and it bordered upon the land which they called Desolation, which was called that because of these people who had been destroyed, not because it didn't have trees. Okay, therefore, Lamanites could have no more possessions, only in the land of Nephi. In other words, this was the only land that they had actually taken by force from the Nephites at this point in time. Now, I hearken back to the original thing about the day and a half journey. Because when you read that more closely, it didn't say from a sea east to the sea west for the day and a half journey to happen. It says, and now it was only the distance of a day and a half journey for a Nephite on the line Bountiful and the land Desolation from the east to the west sea. In other words, from some point out here in the east over to the edge of the West Sea. Now, why is that? How did I come up with that? Well, because there's another scripture that also says that it was a day's journey on the line of their fortifications from the West Sea even to the east. So now it matches up. And this was the line of their fortifications. But they were trying desperately to do, the Lamanites were so far outnumbering the Nephites. Did you ever realize that as a kid. I remember reading the Book of Mormon with my family in the morning, and I always thought, why is it that the good guys are always outnumbered? Whenever the Lamanites come, they always have them outnumbered. Could it be because the Lamanites were making alliances with the Asians that were here? And as it turns out, the oral histories of the Iroquois Indians suggest that they formed alliances with 2 other tribes, and they claim responsibility for the extermination of the mound-building people by their own oral histories. Okay? So, let's see. So there was a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. So, if this was your land, and you knew by prophecy, and also just by the fact that there were so many, that you were completely surrounded by your enemy, how vulnerable are you if you were in the middle of a valley, like the Mississippi River Valley? You're very vulnerable because it's almost impossible to protect all sides. So your best bet is, if you have a smaller army, is you use the natural lay of the land to create an advantage for yourself. And the way you can do that is by using the lakes, because you see, you can get a whole lot of people across land, but boats were still relatively hard to get. I mean, we know that they were doing shipping, but they probably didn't have enough boats to move their entire army. So they knew they had at least some protection if they could just fortify between Lake Erie and Lake Michigan. If they could fortify that line, they had a chance. This is again my picks for the different lands. This is what they look like in relationship to the geographic map anchors that we already established. Here, this is about 71 years before Christ. Alma 50. It came to pass that they did not head them till they had come to the borders of the land of desolation, that it had hid them by the narrow pass. Now, I believe that the narrow pass and the narrow neck are 2 different things. There's a reason for that too, okay? But for the first time, we actually can see that there's a narrow neck here, and I believe that this is a narrow pass up here, which led by the sea into the land northward, yea, by the sea on the west and on the east. Okay, so this is, now, let me see. Oh, yeah, I need to get to this one here, which is Helaman 3, it came to pass that we'd multiply and spread and go forth from the land southward to the land northward. I think this is also interesting. They began to cover the face of the whole earth. Some of the people that are in the Central American idea think, well, the reason why we haven't found any European DNA is because it must be this really tiny little population somewhere that hasn't yet been studied. Well, that doesn't match with the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon says they covered the face of the whole land. And they covered the face of the whole earth from the sea south to the sea north, from the sea west to the sea east. Brothers and sisters, where else on the earth are there 4 seas that could be cardinal seas? Again, my pick is that the sea east is right where Joseph Smith said it was. I believe this is sea south, sea west, and sea north. The sea west makes some sense because when Hagoth left, he said that he took off into the West Sea and he sailed north. Well, if they had their lands down here and they sailed north, he could have come up into here. He could have come up into this area, or he could have just followed the Great Lakes all the way out to the ocean, and from there he could go anywhere. If you have a boat, we'll travel. Okay, it's really fairly simple there. Okay, so 4 cardinal seas that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon are right here where Joseph Smith said it would be. Now, Alma flees King Noah, 147. I just love this part because this shows the actual physical, how the movements would have happened. They're in the land of Nephi. Abinadi comes, he testifies. King Noah gets upset, kills him, and then Alma the elder leaves. He said, it came to pass as many as did believe him did go forth to the place which was called Mormon, having received its name from the king, being in the borders of the land of Nephi, okay, having been infested by times or at seasons by wild beasts. You see anything kind of interesting there? If they were in this land of Nephi, and it was on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, and they crossed onto the western side to get out of the lands of the king of King Noah. If they crossed over the river into this area, now they're on the western side of the Mississippi River, and guess what you have? The buffalo. Okay? So now when they crossed over, at times or seasons, they were infested by these wild beasts. Now, it says that there was in Mormon a fountain of pure water in Mosiah. And this is just incredible. All right, so it says that there was in Mormon a fountain of pure water. Now, when you think about this, here's Alma, the elder. He says, okay, this is the deal, you guys. What we're going to do is we're going to leave here. I want you to go to the river. Cross the river on the other side, you're going to find another river. You follow that river up maybe a few miles, and you're going to find this fountain. But it's not just an average fountain. Okay, what would you think a fountain is? So it'd be kind of like a spring, possibly. Well, it just so happens that it turns out that right in this area is one of the really, it's a phenomenal thing. This is a river that literally comes up out of the ground. When I say a river, I'm talking about the river that's about 3 or 4 times the size of the Provo River that just literally comes out of the ground. There's nothing like it that I'm aware of anywhere in North or South America even. It's, but this is my pick for where the waters of Mormon would have been. That's what it looks like. It comes out of the ground right here. What's that? Oh, it's still there. This is called Big Springs, Missouri, USA. And it is just gorgeous. The water that comes out of it is just like glacier water. The color is just this beautiful, bright blue, like up at Glacier National Park. It's in Arkansas, at the base of the Ozark Mountains on the southern side. This is where it just comes out. I know that you can't see this very well, but it is just the most beautiful blue color. Just a really nice place. But the thing that makes this so unique, and so that's why I could say, you could actually, if you follow up a river so far, you're going to find a spring of some kind, no matter what river you go up. But this had to be unique enough that he could have left instructions for people to go, and they could actually just follow it and go up and find the place. Big Spring, the rates of water coming out are from 152 million to a maximum of 840 million gallons a day. That is a lot of water, okay, coming out of that. Very unique. There's, like I said, there's nothing like it. This is the river coming out of that, okay? And you see this right here? Ancient stone steps. I think these are at least several thousand years old. People had carved in there. By the amount of erosion on them, that's what they think that is. Now, from the waters of Mormon, they were found. Here in Mosiah 23, the Lord had strengthened them, and the people of King Noah could not overtake them to destroy them, but they were found, and they fled 8 days' journey into the wilderness. Which direction did they go? Well, they were originally going to try to look for Zarahemla, but they went 8 days. And it came to pass that they began to prosper exceedingly in the land. They called that land Helam. Well, 8 days isn't much journey, is it? I mean, how hard would it be for a king to just send his army out 8 days? Okay, well, it's not just the 8 days part, because actually, if you left from this point, they actually would have crossed over the Ozark Mountains, and now they would be on the northern side of the Ozark Mountains. So now they have a mountain range between them and the king. That makes sense? So they called that place Helam. This is what it looks like in that general area. Nice, lots of water, streams, nice place to live. Then Alma flees King Noah, 147 BC. They were found again in Helam. Came to pass that they departed out of the valley, took their journey into the wilderness, and after they had been in the wilderness for 12 days, from the northern slopes of the Ozark Mountains, if they follow the river up there 12 days, they arrived in the land of Zarahemla. This is what it looks like as you look off of the Ozark Mountains onto the Mississippi River Valley. Now, this is Mosiah 8, and this one is absolutely, I love this, because this one it talks about, this is the king said unto him, I caused that 43 of my people should take a journey into the wilderness, and that thereby they might find the land of Zarahemla. See, they were down here in the land of Nephi as slaves, and they were trying to get out from that. And they said, you know what, we need to have some help from our friends up here in Zarahemla. They just don't know that we're here. We're going to send some people up here to Zarahemla. We're going to get the help, and we're going to get out. And they were lost in the wilderness for the space of many days. Now, I looked it up in the Book of Mormon, did a little research on that. What does many days signify? And I found out it can mean anywhere from 3 days to an entire lifetime. Okay, and on it says that he lived many days and he died. Okay, so we don't really know how long it could have been. It could have been 6 months. It could have been a year. We don't know how long it was. But we know that Joseph Smith took the brethren from this point clear out to this point in 2 months. So it wouldn't be that big of a stretch to think that they went this direction in 2 months either. Okay? And let's see. So they went into wilderness the space of many days, yet they were diligent, and they found not the land of Zarahemla, but returned to this land, having traveled in a land among many waters. Now, how could these people have gotten so goofed up? How did they not find the Zarahemla? All they got to do is go to the river. I mean, you can just hear here's would be, potentially the instructions here, okay? Okay, this is what you do. You guys, you go to the river. You follow the river up. Get on the western side of it and just keep following that river up, and you're going to find Zarahemla. It's right there on the river. Just follow the river. Well, the only thing about it is if they stayed on the east side of the river for very far, which, you want to cross over the river as northerly as you can, because the river gets smaller and smaller as you go. Well, if they got up to this point, unfortunately, the Ohio River takes off and goes this direction, right up to the Great Lakes. So if they didn't cross the river until they got past the junction of the Ohio and the Mississippi, and they crossed over here and then followed it up on the western side of the river, where would they have ended up at? In a land of many waters. But see, they didn't have any problem getting back, so they just followed the river back. But they didn't find Zarahemla. Here's in Helaman 3. It came to pass, let's just skip down to here. Went forth unto the land northward. They left Zarahemla, went to the land northward to inherit that land. They did travel to an exceedingly great distance, insomuch that they came to large bodies of water and many rivers. Anybody see any large bodies of water and many rivers here? Right in the Great Lakes. Hill Cumorah sits about right there. And you can see all kinds of lakes, rivers, large bodies of water, just like the Book of Mormon said. And finally, final destruction, 322 AD. Mormon says, and it came to pass that the war began to be among them in the borders of Zarahemla by the waters of Sidon. If the Lamanites were out here living, and we didn't really discuss this to any great extent, but you see, the buffalo are very important. But if they were on the western side of the river, you see, they didn't need to have agrarian habits. They literally could live off the buffalo. And isn't that exactly what we found, the settlers, I should say, found when they came across the Mississippi? And the Indian tribes, the Plains Indians, were literally, their entire culture, their civilization was based upon the buffalo. And they traveled with the buffalo. Now all of a sudden it makes sense why the Lamanites always lived in tents. I always wondered, how did the Lamanites live so comfortably? It says that they were a lazy and idolatrous people, right? How did they live so comfortably off the land when the Nephites had to sit there and work all the time and work the land and so forth to provide their food? Well, now the answer is really simple. They were doing the same thing as the Indians were doing when the settlers arrived on the plains. They were following the buffalo herds. And to give you an idea of how critical the buffalo were to those Indian tribes, the United States government knew that if they wanted to bring those tribes to their knees, all they had to do was destroy their source of food, which was also their source of their entire society. And all they needed to do was kill 60 million buffalo. And it was effective. And that's why the Indians were put on reservations because they couldn't make it without the buffalo. Now all of a sudden, all these things in the Book of Mormon start to make sense. So it said that they came from the land of Zarahemla. They attacked, beginning at the borders of Zarahemla by the waters of Sidon. And again, this is the same Zarahemla where God said it was on the western side across the river from Nauvoo. It came to pass that in the 327th year, etc., the Lamanites did come upon us with exceedingly great power, insomuch that they did frighten my armies, because there were so many of them. Therefore they would not fight, and they began to retreat towards the north countries. Now they knew that they had already were working on trying to make that defensible, make a line of defense across here so they could leave and go up into here. And they would have to contend with two lakes. They could possibly, this is about 170 miles or so across there. They could possibly defend that. At least that was the thought. But unfortunately, they didn't get all the defenses completed. And we marched forth and came to the land of Joshua, which is in the west borders of the seashore. And the Lamanites did give us the land northward, yea, even to the narrow passage which led into the land southward. And we did give unto the Lamanites all of the land southward. The Lamanites took Zarahemla and Bountiful and forced the Nephites up into the land desolation. This is, again, at the very end. So this is just a quick review of the evidence. This is some of the evidence supporting a North American setting for the Book of Mormon. This is a few more evidences. These are a few more evidences. Okay, and finally, this is really where it all comes down, because I mentioned about the fruits before. The fruit of the Central America theory is that they have to discount Joseph Smith. But this is where we all come down to. Okay. And in fact, he was going to try to come tonight, but he couldn't make it. But let me just tell you about Jason just for a second. He was 17 years old when his family saw the Godmakers, freaked out, and they were all excommunicated. He's now 30, I think he's 37 or 38 years old. He would go out to BYU and hand out anti-Mormon literature. At least I understand that he got a restraining order against him at BYU. Been very active anti-Mormon. His parents still today are. I home taught him basically for 6 years. We wore out 3 sets of missionaries. Okay, we'd have him come to my house and go to his house and so forth, and just nothing was happening. He just wanted to sit there and bash. And then about 5 months ago, I did this presentation, and he was the last one to leave. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Whoa, this is for the first time I get the feeling that the Book of Mormon's real, and that Joseph Smith was really a prophet." And I'll tell you, there's nothing more sweet than knowing that someday you're going to have your friends with you on the other side as well. And that brings us to the final slide, and this is section 71. Because I've had people say, well, even if it is the case, should you really go out there and try to do anything about it? Just let the sleeping dogs lie, so to speak. But I'm taking my cue from the scriptures, and that cue is this. It says, "Wherefore labor ye in my vineyard, call upon the inhabitants of the earth, and bear record, and prepare the way. Wherefore confound your enemies, call upon them to meet you, both in public and in private. And inasmuch as ye are faithful, their shame shall be made manifest. Wherefore let them bring forth their strong reasons against the Lord. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, there is no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper. And if any man lift his voice against you, he shall be confounded in mine own due time." Just like President Hinckley said about the DNA when interviewed by the German reporter in 2002. Brothers and sisters, let me just close real quick with my personal testimony, having done this research for the last 2.5, 3 years, has brought me to a much deeper appreciation and understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I can stand before you as a witness that not only do I know that the Book of Mormon is true spiritually, I believe that that is the most important, okay, of all the possible ways that you can know that the Book of Mormon is true. But the Book of Mormon is more than just a spiritual record. The Book of Mormon is a literal history of real people. And they were really here, and their evidence is here. And their DNA was left behind, and their civilizations were left behind. And all we need to do is look where the prophet Joseph Smith said to look, and we will find the evidence. Now, there's been millions and millions of dollars have been spent in a vain attempt to show the Book of Mormon happened in Central America. My hope is that with this DNA and the DVD and the information here, that we can at least have some discussion about the Book of Mormon being where Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon itself testify that it happened. And if that happens, and if we can touch the lives of as many people as possible and strengthen the testimonies, just like it said, the fullness of joy comes from the spiritual and the physical coming together, the evidence and the knowing from the Lord what is true. My brothers and sisters, that is my testimony. I know that the gospel is true. When I say that I know it, again, it's in the same way that we know things. It's when the Spirit has testified and then the knowledge comes and then our faith is dormant. Well, there's certain parts of the gospel that I know are true. Do I know that all of it is? I'm still working on that. But I just want you to know that I appreciate your time for coming. I know that it's grown late. I would hope that this can make a difference in somebody's lives. And I know it's already made a difference in mine and my dear friend. So but they would like to say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Recently, the introduction page of the Book of Mormon has actually been changed, whereas it before said, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. That has now been changed to say, instead of principal ancestors, it says among the ancestors of the American Indians, which actually goes along exactly with what the information from this research has been showing.